So here we are, we're back with Looking Glass Forum, and we're doing our very best to bring you some news coverage and some different articles and discussions that are relevant and prescient in our kind of changing political landscape here in America. And you can see that we're under the gun, guys. We're definitely the weight of all these centuries of planning. I think you can take it back to as early as 1913 when you can see the Federal Reserve System coming into place. I think the whole plan that individuals had set out that it would last far past their own lifetimes is coming to fruition. The plan was to bring America into insolvency, into debt slavery. Okay, so once we had gold and silver money, we were trading with a currency that was valuable, it had intrinsic value. And today you can see that we're down to a silver-plated pot metal and printed paper notes, which have no intrinsic value whatsoever. And as we're getting kind of into this cascading and unrecoverable debt cycle, we're printing out trillions and trillions of dollars of notes we're supposed to somehow pay back with interest. We're getting into this cycle of the final collapse of American economic and financial hegemony. And of course, we have a voluntary military and police. So once you can't pay people anymore, or their paychecks don't have any more value, you can see that the degradation of the society will be complete, and it'll be totally thorough across the board. So that's why you can see a lot of the jet set globalist elite are able to easily prepare for the downturn, but the rest of us will be kind of swallowed in the famine. Okay, so that's what's coming. That's ultimately what you can see. There's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of betrayal and backstabbing within Congress to kind of keep on carrying on these CRs, keep on carrying on these omnibus spending packages and just spend us and our children and our grandchildren into oblivion. And I think that's the plan. That's the plan, to slow walk this so all the statute of limitations runs out on all their crimes, and the ability for us to somehow get some sane people, some responsible adults who are actually elected legally into the positions of responsibility and of power, into the nodes of control, into the different... You can see we already got some kind of radical activist psychopath up on the Supreme Court. So the corrosion and the degradation is getting pretty complete. And we're pushing back. Mitt Romney got sent packing. Nancy Pelosi is being exposed for her central role in the Fedsurrection on January 6th. But little by little, not quite enough is being done to recover the nation in time. It's like somebody jumping from the back seat and grabbing onto the steering wheel and while you're driving and turning the wheel crazily into the trees, and you're trying to grab the wheel back and turn it back in time. But now we're in this death struggle here in America to see who is going to be at the levers of control and who ultimately is going to see their machinations and their planning enacted. And you can see with a country or the nation like this, it's far easier to disrupt and destroy and burn down a highly organized system like this than it is to maintain it. And so the difficult work of maintaining our system and our nation will now have to go into the grueling work of going carefully through the nation to see who is here legally. And as we have to kind of stop and frisk every single person in the country to see if they belong here or not, and then having to go through the excruciating and painstaking work of carting everyone away who doesn't belong here, and all the gunfights and crimes and, the bloody assaults that will result from having to do this work. I imagine now in my most suspicious mind that this is all just part of the plan, that, they've just let the problem become so acute, let so many tens of millions of people run into the country. So it's such a massive, incredible crisis. And then, another individual comes in, like, let's say Donald Trump, and he's there to fix the problem now. And so, after we as a nation allowed, the body politic or the uniparty system in control allowed the problem to become so devastating that we've gone from needing a Band-Aid to needing, heart surgery as a nation. So I worry about the problems that will come from trying to right the ship, trying to recover our Constitution, and the conflict and the battles that will ensue over just that, over our attempts to take back what is ours and what is being politically labeled as racism or some kind of entitlement. And the people here in America who have Social Security numbers are being indebted by them. So the Social Security numbers are supposed to mark you for someday when you get old and you're supposed to get some kind of benefit. But in this upside down world of a collapsing dollar and inverting yield curves so that the value of the money is no longer financially relative, we can see that the devastation that the provocateurs and the conspirators that have worked behind the scenes to disrupt and destroy our nation, when once those ambitions were impossible dreams, now they've brought them within striking distance. So it's now time for us to recognize what is going on. So that's why we have to kind of go more deeply into the subject matter here in order to understand what is going on with our country and with our nation. And so in a lot of ways, as we're going forward, we can see that we have to go back historically to understand the causal chain of events, the causality that leads us to this point in our own history presently that we're facing. So it's just like if you had some kind of massive flood on your property, it was unexpected and unnatural, right? You might want to follow the trail of that flood back uphill to where it came from. And it's just like what we do when we're tracing through history. We're tracing through time, and we're going back through time to find the cause of events, what actually is taking place, and what caused us to be in the position and the predicament as Americans that we're in right now. And so as we do that, we have to always constantly go back. And we're about to present a little spot here by Jay Dyer. He always has interesting thoughts and gives real candor and expression to the history that you can't find other places. You can't find people to speak openly and kind of candidly about history. And so we have to go back to the reality of the occult inflection point in history, and we have to go back to discuss how the Illuminati and the forces of the Illuminati, how they arose in Europe, and this revolutionary faction, the chain of events that would be caused by their attempts to bring down Europe and all the different various European nations into a conflagration of civil war and internal revolutions that would destroy the old systems and bring them into a new a utopian global order. And of course, this is not a new idea. This kind of idea of going back to destroy all the old systems in various places and languages and diversity in the world, and to break it down and to create one whole new global order is not a new idea, but it's something that if you go back to Aristotle and you go back to the Greeks and you go back to the certain ancient philosophers and Pythagoras and so on and so forth, you can see that these ideas were, if very archaic, being presented very early on in human history. And so when you see Adam Weishaupt, who would be the would-be so-called founder of the Illuminati, when he comes up with all these ideas of creating a one world order and destroying all the other nations, it was kind of an insane and outrageous ambition that they set upon. But we need to know more about the history and of how that plays out. And so as we're going forward, we need to recognize that a lot of these pundits and individuals we have on here talking will not discuss directly what is going on with the Yale wing of the CIA, as Steve Bannon calls it, or the Bush wing of the Republican Party. And we all understand, many of us understand that that's it to be at Yale, the Order of Skull and Bones, which was set up in New Haven, Connecticut in 1833. And around the same time, that very previous year, I believe, in 1832, the Skull and Bones Order would be set up at New Haven, Connecticut, right at Yale, as a secret society, a senior fraternity at the school that no one would notice, would just go unnoticed, right? And the following year, of course, the powerful Knights of Columbus, the Roman Catholic Order of Knights, was also created in New Haven, Connecticut the following year. So it's important to understand that there are really two sides of the same coin. And this new American order in America, this new lange, if you will, would be really a lange or another chapter of the Knights of Malta, right, in America. Another knighthood, a new knighthood order, a papal order. And just the same way, this secret society at Yale, Skull and Bones 322, famously would be set up at Yale, which was ostensibly a Protestant college set to send missionaries and Bible teachers all throughout the world. And that's what they were doing. So lo and behold, Jesuit agents here to secrete the counter-Reformation ideology of conquering all for the Pope, right, was now quietly creeping into the Yale campus. And so you can follow the history from there. But of course, this was set up previous to the Civil War. So like we've said before, we have a lot of interest in finding out over time with our historical studies how much influence the the Order of Skull and Bones would have on the coming Civil War. And that's a really big deal. And ultimately it goes all into the machinations and the conspiracy of Roman Catholics to have Abraham Lincoln assassinated and killed, and the conspiracy theories that go all around that. But let's make no mistake, it was a horrifying murder conspiracy to kill Lincoln, and certain priests, Roman Catholic priests and others, and Mary Surratt and John Surratt, really hardcore Latin-going Roman Catholics who felt the need to murder Lincoln, right? Which is really what it was all about. And that in that murder of Lincoln, the State Department would cut off all diplomatic ties to the Vatican, or the Holy See. It wasn't really called the Vatican until 1929 in the Lateran Treaty, but what we all understand to be the Vatican, or the Holy See, or the offices of the Pope over there in Rome, so that the Washington D.C. would have no more contact or diplomatic communication because with the Pope and his emissaries, because they knew very well who was behind the assassination of Lincoln. So it's important for us to understand, even if we're not in an us versus them mode, or we don't understand it, we need to understand who they are, who are remembering the old ways and the old battles and the old conflicts, and who keep them alive, and whose purpose it is to accomplish their mission, even if it's centuries late. And their mission is to destroy all popular government, all democratic representative governments in the world, and bring them down, because they consider them to be heretical. So this is why it's so important we understand the nature of the Illuminati, because the Illuminati would come into existence in 1773, right at the same time that the powerful Jesuit order at the time, that the Society of Jesus, was put to extinction by the Pope. So as we always tell the story, Pope Clement XIII was poisoned at his desk as he tried to sign the documents that would extinguish the Jesuit order. And then after he died, the political momentum against the Jesuits is so great that Clement XIV comes into office and signs the documents, and the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus, is therefore extinguished forever. At least it was supposed to be. So herein begins the origin story of the Illuminati, because after the Jesuits' authority and power had been abrogated and rescinded by the papacy, they had to go underground, and they had to take on other means and other systems of fraternal and occult control and power by which they could place their great wealth and their great influence into new vehicles and new agencies, which would give them power around the world. And that's how you can see them taking the form of the Illuminati. So that's why I kind of take issue a little bit with Brother Dyer here when he says that, kind of apologizes for the Jesuit order a little bit, and says that they weren't really there, but they were there. They were at the heart of the founding of the Illuminati, and they would use the Illuminati order and the Jacobins, and they would build the Scottish Rite Freemason structure, and they would keep all these occult legacies alive for their own purposes and use them. Various papal orders of monks, like the Redemptorists and others, were created by the Jesuits and used by them and inhabited by them as they took on different disguises and took on different forms to carry on and go into places in the world where they were safe. So they would go underground, and this is what it's all about. This is the history of the Illuminati structure. And that's why you have to understand why Ingolstadt University in Bavaria, where the Illuminati began, was, of course, a college of canon law and Roman Catholic scholarship. And, of course, Adam Weishaupt was not a Jew, as many like to kind of create weird implications with this kind of paranoid disinformation. And so you have to really know your facts. You have to really know your information and the various details of history so that you can kind of see your way through it. And you can know full well that Adam Weishaupt was not a Jew, because ultimately he was a Jesuit, and he was a Jesuit scholar, to say the least. And so you can see how these pieces come together, and if you don't understand the implications of history, you won't, it will be difficult for you to piece it together. So I want to show you how important it is for these Jesuit agencies to operate through schools like Yale, and like how they took over Ingolstadt, and how apparent it is that a military phalanx and an occult fraternal structure was put into place to immediately occupy the place of the executive branch, because that's what the original Skull and Bones men would do. The very first Skull and Bones men would be presidents and Supreme Court justices like William Howard Taft, etc., Pillsbury, Kellogg, Vanderbilt, Bush, Prescott. And these are the just a few of the hundreds and hundreds of names of the elite, kind of noble bloodline families, if you want, who are in America, who are going to be carefully channeled through this system of power that's being established there at Yale in 1832. So as we go forward, it's important for us to kind of recognize the implications of what it means if occult fraternal operators from Europe are operating in the background of our university structures, just the way that the Jesuits backed up and took the form of the Illuminati and overturned Europe. And it's clear now that they were behind the Jacobins and the French Revolution. It's clear now that they were the hand behind the puppet that moved Napoleon. So the study of the Illuminati is very important, but to understand that it was the entrenched and beleaguered Jesuit order and their vile counter-reformation and their clandestine move towards the establishment of ultramontane power over all the rest of the world and the destruction of democracies around the world, no matter how numerous, right? And the same can be true with Islam. I think the Jesuit order has been at war with Islam, too. It was something that Ignatius Loyola, at the very beginning of his ambitions, even went all the way to Jerusalem and encountered the Muslims there who were controlling Jerusalem at the time and vowed to free Jerusalem from the Saracens and from the Muslim armies, right? And that was one of Loyola's, the Jesuit founders' central visions and dreams for the world. And you can see how much of this has been in progress and how fast we're moving forward in time, as we can see that their march towards total domination has pretty much gone unimpeded, even if it was gone unnoticed by the rest of the world, as it takes different forms. And you can see how influential Yale was in the 1940s there, and having Mao Zedong, who was a Yali, a Yale in China. So he was a Yale scholar, a Yale student that was, brought into various Yale studies. And that was where the influence for this malicious and bloodthirsty move towards communism. You can see Mao Zedong would be responsible for murdering half the population, some 40 million people. It's some insane number that's innumerable. And you can see that this European and Western ideology of communism and Marxism and Stalinism is used to control those people and destroy them in the Far East with this kind of crazy idea virus and this kind of will to power and this excuse to lock everyone else down and murder everyone else under the pretension of some kind of, beautiful ideals for the greater good, right? So now we can see clearly that who is behind the rise of the Illuminati. So we don't want to just say there was some Jesuits there, but they weren't Jesuits anymore. They once Jesuit, influence, then always so. And they renamed themselves. And of course, to complete the story regarding that, they would have ultimately come back into being, and that would take place right at 1813 and 1814, when they would finally get a pope to submit to their will and sign a new bull, bringing them back into existence. So it's the revival of the Jesuit order. And you can see that famously John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and other of the founding fathers knew well of it, because they would write letters to one another and discuss how they did not like to see the reemergence of the Jesuit order, right? And that's the famous quote. They'll be here in the colonies, here in North America, in all the different disguises as painters or teachers, or right. They'll infiltrate here, and they'll cause revolution and problems and cause famines and destructions and fires and murders here in the Americas, right? And that's exactly what happened, guys. And you can see that through the machinations of the different crown heads and different monarchs that they controlled through the Illuminati agencies and various other agencies, Continental Freemasonry and the Grand Orient Freemasonry were orders of occult Freemasonry that were centuries old, that were in control in France and in control in England. And they were mechanisms that the Jesuits had full influence and dominion in. And you can see one of the last moves before being restored was to do something with a little known war that we call the War of 1812. And that's when the British finally get their get back, and they storm down through Canada, through the waterways, come over land. In an ambitious venture, they sack the capital, they burn the White House, and they take a whole bunch of money and grants and charter documents. And so you can see that the city of London had its final say right there, right before 1813, 1814, right before the Jesuit order was restored back into their saintly garb of being priests, brought back into being, as you will, revived. That's what they like to say. And of course, there's allusions to be made in comparison with the destruction of the Jesuit order by the Pope, Clement the 13th and 14th. And you can see very well that that has similarities to what happened to the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were, famously on Friday the 13th, or I think it was in 1307, if I'm saying that right. They were destroyed by the King of France and by the Pope at the time, coming together to take out the Templar Knights with the sudden surprise action. And so in a similar way, the Jesuit order is like the revival of the Templar Knights. And they were originally going to be called the Knights of the Virgin Mary. And so you can understand the Jesuit order to be a military order. As a pastor and teacher Phelps always likes to point out to us. And even though they take on the optics of a priestly caste, that's not actually what's taking place behind the scenes. So as we go forward here, we have to just present Jay Dyer. He's going to discuss a little bit about these connections that we have to begin to recognize between what happened with the gunpowder plot, the Jesuit plot to blow up the king and the parliament even in England. And we have to recognize the plotting and the military weaponry and the ambition of the Jesuit order, the Jesuit knights, if you want, in their military mission and conquest to bring all the kings and presidents and judges and chief people of the world, to their knees, submitted before the Pope to become the ultimate universal monarch of the world. So it's within the ambition and the teaching and the design of the Jesuit order to bring the papacy and the occupant of the chair of Peter to absolute world dominion and preeminence. So that's why we, over here on the Protestant side, and point out critically there that is the mission of the Antichrist, to do the very same thing. And so that's ultimately why we have to, give this perspective into the world, give this looking glass viewpoint into the world so you can see what are the designs of other people, even if you like yoga and tennis and you're not really interested in what the Jesuits believe. Well, the Jesuits are very interested in what they believe, and they are going about in what is in their minds their sacred mission and their call, their mission from God, to go and destroy all heretics, all people in the world who they consider to be evildoers or not submitting to the absolute spiritual and temporal dominion of the Pope, right? And so that's why I always do my level best to point out to Roman Catholics in America that they have a subservience to their liege lord, their king, the Pope. So their first allegiance is to a foreign monarch and a foreign dictator and a foreign king, not to our president or our way of life or our country. Okay, so the whole point of the Jesuit order is that they betray every nation they swear to keep safe, or every oath they swear to uphold is a betrayal, because their first allegiance is to the Pope and to his mission, and they'll do anything, any kind of crime, and consider it to be a work of God. They can commit any kind of murder and consider it to be a blessing from heaven, because in their minds, just like when a psychopathic terrorist blows himself up with a car bomb to try to go to heaven, it's the same kind of mindset and radicalism and extremism that comes from the Jesuit order. And you can see that over and over and again in history, and it's a system of incubating the zealotry that really can't be stopped. And part of it goes back to, if you go back historically, to the Old Man on the Mountain and the Hashishan sect, when the Templars started to interact with these older occult pagan systems of Persia and ancient systems of sorcery and clandestine assassination. And so that really needs to all come into play now, because the Hashishans, or the Order of Assassins, was really something that merged with the Templar order over time. And as they originally probably began to do battle over time, they had some kind of understanding, and they had some kind of intermeshing of their orders and learning and their scholarship and their kind of occult arcana. And so that's why you can see that the Templar order would be transformed. It was probably infiltrated by acolytes of this ancient Persian occult assassination society. So people don't know about the Hashishans, or the ancient occult order of assassins. It was discovered there by the Knights of Templar. I don't know if they ever would have known that it was there if they hadn't kind of come in contact with it. And so you can see over time that the unfolding of these various orders for political purposes and the emergence and the creation of the Jesuit order in the minds of many is the quiet and camouflage reemergence of the Templar Knights. And so I think it's important to point out that the Council of Trent ideology, which places the Pope on top of all dominion and authority as the monarch of the world and casts down all who question it as heretics are being burned at the stake and sent to hell, and that being enframed as the ultimate doxology and the ultimate theocratic statement of faith, enframed at the center of Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, and the Catechism and all canon law and teaching, and the magisterium, right? And the curia. It's all framed around this idea that real Christianity in Rome and Roman Christianity is that the Pope is the king of the world and you kiss his feet, and if you don't want to, we're going to burn you and send you to hell. And that's pretty much the central thesis of it. So all those people here in America are starting to have problems with the papacy. You have to understand you're being disregarded and relegated to the fate of America, and you'll be just cast aside as liberal Catholics or heretics. And you can just meet the fate that America is about to meet if you won't run over and just change, switch gears and just, change your own beliefs and your own liberty of, conscience, your freedom of conscience, just, whenever the Pope tells you to, right? So that's what it comes down to. It comes down to this point of recognizing that the Counter-Reformation forces are still in full effect. That's what the Klaus Schwab thing is all about. That's why you see the establishment of the CIA in 1947, and then in 1948, Roswell and UFOs and this kind of like sky gods from Martians, kind of concept comes down, and we're inundated with ET and, Star Wars, and just Star Trek, right? Live long and prosper. So we're all convinced that if you just look past every cloud, there's three UFOs there. And we're all convinced that we've just been to the moon, and, we're all convinced of these things. But we just spin our own ability to understand what is taking place and what the plan for America's future. I don't think people are prepared to contemplate that. So now, as we go forward, let's take a listen to Jay Dyer. And I apologize for the long intro. I had to remake it twice. So I completely forgot whatever I was talking about before, and we just talked about that. But as we're going forward, it's important also with Steve Bannon to point out to him that, look, you can call those guys the cadre or the cartel over there in Texas, but we know it's the Skull and Bones men out of Yale, which are really the forces of Bavaria and Germany, which was where William Huntington Russell went to on his trip, right? Right at the time of Hegel's funeral, right after that time when Europe was still remembering the death of Hegel, Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel, the famous Illuminati philosopher, right? That's when the Order of Skull and Bones is going to be born. And you can see it's coming right out of Bavaria, and you can see where it's coming from, and under a new name now, but it's the same old program. And so if you won't recognize now how influential Skull and Bones is, even up till Bush and Kerry, and how infiltrated our whole system is, and the whole point of Skull and Bones was to create an executive office that would become a dictatorship. So they're created in 1832. Lo and behold, we have a civil war, and all of a sudden Lincoln is assassinated in the face. Pop. And all of a sudden now we have an out-of-control executive branch with just executive orders that just become law. Executive proclamations. He just signs it, and then they all run over and they authorize military strikes. They do whatever he says, but that's completely unconstitutional and completely illegal. So that's the whole point now, my friends, is what I'm trying to say, is it's all about controlling the executive branch and controlling those executive proclamations instead of putting them away and undoing them and putting us back to de jure constitutional Republican small r democracy, small d. Okay, so where we can all just go back to, if we want to go to war, we'll have, the president can sign a paper after the Congress and Senate empower a war, right? So that's the same thing. We're not going to fix this out of control war mongering, and we're not going to fix the out of control debt expenditures because now they've cut open our jugular, and we're pouring out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars into the sand, and we can't get it back. We can't pay it back. We can't even reproduce children fast enough to pay back the debt. All right. So that's why you have all these illegal immigrants pouring in the country. It's not just here. We can't take it personal, but of course it's just all over the world, in every country, in France, and Italy, and Sweden, and everywhere in the world. the World Economic Forum program is coming to life. And you can see that it's just the Counter-Reformation plan. It never changed. It never slept or never slumbered. It moved along the entire time under different names and through different forms, and we did not recognize it.
Modern revolutionary philosophy. And then we'll work our way up to today, and we'll see how that revolutionary philosophy is at work in the establishment's plans for austerity, ESG, lockdowns, and all the measures they want to put in place to enforce a technocracy. The Establishment, Fire in the Minds of Men by James Billington, The Origins of the Revolutionary Faith. He's, of course, not a conspiracy theorist, but a person who was, as an academic and a historian, archiving and chronicling the history of revolutionary philosophy and thought from the time of the French Revolution all the way up until the early 20th century. And James Billington noted that to really understand today's revolutionary philosophies, you have to go back to the faith of the original revolutionaries at the time of and right before the French Revolution and their influences. What were they influenced by? Well, they were influenced by philosophies like Platonism. There was a Byzantine Platonist named Platon that influenced Spinoza, that influenced Weishaupt and other Jacobins. And the philosophy of Pythagoras played a key element, as well as the philosophies of ancient pre-Socratics like Heraclitus. Heraclitus taught that all is fire and all is flux. And so one of the things that the early Illuminists, people like Weishaupt and a guy called Buonarroti, who were really influential on the Jacobins in the French Revolution, they decided to take certain symbols from ancient mystical religions like the Zoroastrians. And Zoroastrianism is a dualistic religion that believes that there's always these two principles eternally fighting with each other throughout history, and that never ends. It's an eternal dualistic dialectical battle. That becomes kind of the basis for later Hermetic philosophers like Hegel, who will influence people like Marx. But before we get to that, we have to understand that the French revolutionary philosophers had a radical view of equalitarianism across society. And they thought that because, well, what's the best way to fix man's ills? Man's ills relate to believing in any kind of hierarchy at all, in the hierarchy of church and state. And so if we get rid of that and we put in place a radical egalitarian and equalitarian society, perhaps a form of utopia could develop or could be imagined. And so this is where entities like Masonic lodges and secret societies at that time began to be useful to certain revolutionaries to try to spread their revolutionary ideas against the notions of nobility and aristocracy. However, some of these were extremely radical in their views, to the extent that they even believed that all things should be held in common, including wives and children. And one of the things they did was they took the doctrine of fire from Zoroastrians and from Manichaeans to be a symbol of their religion. Because if you think about it, fire is always kind of moving, it's hot, it never comes to any rest. And so it's a perfect image for the old Heraclitean idea of the pre-Socratics, of the philosophers, that everything is flux, nothing is true, nothing is stable, everything is perpetual revolution and change. And so the religion itself becomes change. The journey is the end, some of the Marxists have said in history. They borrowed their model on how to structure this inner party, outer party on the Jesuits. Doesn't mean that they were at this time actually Jesuits. I don't believe that they were. I think that Weishaupt himself did lead the Jesuits and borrow the structure for his society on how the Jesuits were structured, although I think that eventually later Jesuits are part of this superstructure because they are eventually allied with the CIA in the 20th century.
So it's easy for me just to pause there and just point out that, the historical reading, if you go back to John Robinson and others, if you look at it carefully, you could try to cushion the influence of the Jesuits. You could try to sugarcoat the radical nature of their counter-Reformation ideology, and you could try to revision the historical analysis where they're just in the background, but they're not really involved, but maybe later they get involved. That's just such a kind of erroneous
and kind of cockamamie apology for the Jesuit order, because the truth is, Adam Weishaupt was a Jesuit, and he never left the Jesuit order. Then he moved over because at the time, which this gentleman, despite his historical knowledge, doesn't point out, at the time of 1773, the Jesuit order is going to be put to extinguishment. It's going to be put to death, and it's going to be, similarly to what happened to the Templar Knights on Friday the 13th, right? Famously, back in time, we go back to the 1300s. This similar situation fate was befalling the Jesuit order, because Clementine the 13th would sign the bull to censure and to eradicate and to basically deconstruct the Jesuit order from existing anymore. And he was poisoned, right? So Clement the 14th comes in and he finishes the work of Clement the 13th and actually does the work of signing the bull, and the Jesuit order is forever extinguished. So ipso facto, in 1776, suddenly the Illuminati order, not connected to the Jesuits, suddenly appears, right, in full force. So it's pretty obvious what happened there. Is that all around Europe, the legal authority of the Pope was used to censure and to demolish and to send the Jesuits scattering and hiding, and they reemerged in the form of the Illuminati order. They just weren't in the background quietly taking part. They were actually the Illuminati. The Jesuits are the Illuminati.
As is the papacy after the Cold War. And so what we have is this idea that we can structure an inner party and an outer party, and we'll eventually have a happy equality, happy equalitarianism. There will be a completely natural religion that will be like the noble lie or the state-fostered, state-funded, and created and controlled religion. And it will be something like a kind of civic nationalism or a civic global religion that H.G. Wells talked about, who is a consistent sort of ideological lineage of this conspiracy. H.G. Wells is a high-level Freemason, and so he knew about the positions and ideas of Weishaupt that would eventually become basically technocracy. And that's what H.G. Wells and the whole Royal Society pushed for. They later combined it not just with egalitarianism, at least for the masses, but with the idea of the Malthusian idea of depopulation. Pythagoras is one of the key philosophy figures, because Pythagoras was a proto-communitarian, a proto-communist. The idea was to overthrow all traditional forms of nation states, people groups, all traditional forms of religion and statecraft, including the idea of the king or any kind of hierarchy, to create this equalitarian society. But what's interesting is that in reality, I think the inner group, the inner elite, the inner party, they always knew that it wasn't really egalitarian. That's what they tell the people to manipulate the masses, because these radical philosophies always had, for the most part, very powerful, wealthy, influential supporters in the background. And that's because more perceptive and more cunning people understood that philosophies like radical communism, radical socialism, and Marxism could actually be tools for statecraft, tools for foreign powers, tools for changing the existing regime into something else. And as we progress in the history of Marxism, many of the classical Marxists continue this radical worship of flux and change. You find this in Lenin, you find it in Trotsky, you find it in Mao in their writings. And what that means is that there's no longer principles that are objective or outside of man that man submits to. So there's no principles of hierarchy in nature, right? Jordan Peterson talks a lot about lobster hierarchies, lobster dominance, the dominance hierarchies. Well, the dominance hierarchies are actually in nature. It is a principle of the natural order. But the consistent revolutionary realizes that all external impositions, including hierarchy in nature, is a unwanted oppression. And so by the time of, post-Hegel and post-Marx, everything turns into an oppressor-oppressed control power dynamic. And so it's no longer about anybody submitting to or having to recognize external principles of truth and falsehood, good versus evil, purpose. Purpose doesn't exist. Meaning doesn't exist in the world. It's all a social construct just like everything else was a social construct. This is the inevitable result. It takes a few centuries for this to come about, but you go back to the skepticism of David Hume. David Hume was already beginning to psychologize all of these principles that the ancient and medieval world would have seen as actual principles operant in the external world. Essentialism, right? Aristotle's essences, those things existed in the world. A man's a man, a woman's a woman, authority is authority, right? Objects have the identity that they have. A tree is a tree, a dog is a dog. When all of that begins to break down post-Enlightenment, post-David Hume, post all these people, eventually what you get is post-Darwin and post-Nietzsche, a pure will to power, top-down control structure with no intention of submitting to any kind of external principles. There are no laws, there are no rules. Everything is determined by, dictated by the establishment. That is the operating system that we're under today. The Hegelian idea that the state is the march of God in history. And the state in the Hegelian system, and this is why it works so well to blend with Marxism, the state is synthesizing and emerging into a superstructure that can even destroy itself in multiple revolutions because it's a secret inter-party state that runs the public states that we know of as the state. It can destroy itself and revolutionize itself to create the synthesis out of all of these oppositions, which is ultimately the technocratic one world state, as all of these people envisioned centuries ago. That's where we're going. That is the plan. There's only one plan. And it's been the same plan at least back to Weishaupt in terms of the modern era, openly, and Buonarroti, all of whom wanted a one world, socialist, technocratic government. This is the Alex Jones Show. We're going to look at more examples of this in the modern era when we come back from this commercial break. Don't go anywhere. This is the Alex Jones Show. Modern examples. And if we think about the recent information that popped up in regard to the supposed neo-Nazi groups out of nowhere, just all over social media, that it suddenly exists in everyone's purview. The irony here is that, while the establishment has been telling us for many years that anyone who questions elections or who has conservative tendencies at all is a neo-Nazi, a fascist, right? If you follow Trump, you're a neo-Nazi, all this nonsense. Well, the irony is that the very groups that have been calling us out as these ridiculous positions, they're the ones that have been consistently funding and fostering the real neo-Nazi groups throughout the Ukraine. Going back to 2014, John McCain famously took a trip over there, appeared on stage with the right sector, Pravi sector people. Those are people connected to Azov Battalion. And Rachel Blevins of RT, she recently did a report where she interviewed one of these characters, Boneface, I guess is his name. This guy looks like a total prison recruit guy who claims himself to have been trafficked around to these conflict zones by the FBI and the CIA. And that makes perfect sense. Why is that? Well, it ties into my dialectical control theory here, my position here, that we went back to the French revolutionary figures to look at. Fast forward to today, and if you go into the history of the Ukraine, what we find out is that really the Ukraine has been about a 75-year proxy for Western intelligence. This goes back to the World War II intelligence networks that were set up by Reinhard Gehlen. He was probably one of the most famous World War II intelligence operatives for the Germans. And he was very adept at creating and establishing vast spy networks. He's not the only one. There were other people involved in this, people like Otto Skorzeny, members of the SS and so forth, who made up these networks, who post-World War II, when the Nazis were defeated, they reached out to Alan Dulles, Bill Donovan of the OSS, and James Jesus Angleton and said, I will hand you all of these networks to use for Western intelligence if you allow me to have my freedom. And so Gehlen went on to become the head of the BND, the German intelligence, for all the way up until the 1960s. So nobody seemed to care about this Nazi history and pedigree. This is part of Paperclip because he made a deal and he was allowed to have that freedom status for turning over these networks, which the CIA then utilized to be part of Gladio to set up their stay-behind units in case of the supposed Stalinist Soviet invasion of Europe. But what happened is that a lot of these groups, these paramilitary fascist groups that were part of the P2 Lodge, the Gladio operation was really masterminded, according to Paul Williams and people like Daniel Ganser and his PhD thesis, by Kissinger. So this is really a Kissinger project to stave off any kind of Soviet invasion of Europe. But what happened was that this also allowed for a lot of networks and cells to be set up all throughout Europe that were trained in black ops, trained in terror, trained in bomb making, assassinations, mass shootings. So this is a fact. This all came out in the 1990s when Gladio first began to be exposed. And this is run by NATO. So in other words, NATO is essentially a terrorist organization in this regard to Gladio. And NATO recently declassified, or came out, or was declassified, or just published in the Gray Zone, did a great report about this in 2021. I think we did a full breakdown on this in one of the fourth hours of Alex a couple of years ago when it came out. But it's NATO's cognitive warfare document. Now, remember, we're supposed to be bad guys in the U.S. If you support Trump, you're a Nazi. But the actual establishment really does have and has utilized Nazi stay-behind networks and units since World War II. Famously, public declassified document that Reinhard Gehlen's networks were taken over by the CIA in the post-World War II period. Now, those same networks under Gehlen sent people to train the Nazi groups that still exist today in the Ukraine. Now, you may have heard of Stepan Bandera. He's one of the key figures that was running that for many years in the Ukraine. There are actual SS and people under Gehlen that were sent to train those people. So those post-World War II networks have always been there. And so this shows that the system is not actually interested in going after neo-Nazis and Nazis. That's all just for public purview. They're perfectly happy to use these groups, even all the way up until John McCain flying over there, even up until to today, if it's useful to supposedly, fight Putin, who's also Hitler. So it makes no sense. Funding actual neo-Nazi groups to fight against Hitler, Putin, literally makes no sense. That's all propaganda, you see. But this completely destroys the narrative that the establishment, the system, is genuinely concerned with combating the greatest threat to America, white supremacists. Well, now, wait a minute. Then why are you funding the actual neo-Nazis in the Ukraine? And the media has made a big fuss about that. The media was complaining about this. Mainstream media was complaining about neo-Nazis being supported and aided in Ukraine all the way up until the Russian special military operation, which now it suddenly became an issue. Now there are no Nazis in Ukraine, you see. So Zelensky was corrupt, according to mainstream media, all the way up until the last few years. Now he's no longer corrupt. Now we have to support him. So you see the absurdity and the Orwellian contradictory notions involved in this Manuel Goldstein style operation a la 1984, right? The cutout villains that are out there that are really just used by the system. And so this is an example of manipulation of dialectics. So you're supposedly bad for supporting Trump you're a Nazi that supports Trump. The fascists support Trump, which is just completely ridiculous. Meanwhile, the actual establishment since 2014, at least, and it goes back older than that. You can go back to the 1980s. The West, the CIA, was funding a lot of these groups as well back then, and all the way back, as we said, to the post-World War II era, when Ukrainian nationalism, at least right after World War I, was erected as this bulwark against Sovietism. And they utilized these Nazi networks to do that, which have been there for a long time. I mean, the Nazi networks post-World War II, but the anti-Russian sentiment, at least back to 75 years there. So this is a geostrategic plan that plays into large-scale dialectics, and it just demonstrates that the establishment really has no desire to actually combat Nazism. That's just a weapon and a tool that they use to smear and go after anybody in the United States who has mildly conservative views, you see. That's dialectical manipulation, and that shows that these are not real threats in America, right? There are occasional wackos and people oftentimes that might even be goaded by the feds to act in this kind of a way. But if you look up the documentary, The Newburgh Sting, which there was a radical mosque set up, which was a honey trap. If you look up the history of Elohim City and McVeigh, same type of honey trap operation. And I think that the danger is that I think Whitney Webb pointed this out. These same groups from Ukraine might be utilized to spark some kind of fake event, staged event here in the U.S., at least after all of this Twitter furor with Musk. So that's for the West. Proxy groups to be used to put pressure on Russia. And the absurdity of sort of calling out anybody who would question that or would question recent events as Trump Nazis or some sort of ridiculous thing like this. So, but I wanted to now move to a NATO document that we mentioned, the cognitive warfare document, because if you heard Alex yesterday when he was talking about the Greg Reese report or the John Bowne report on the DARPA lecture that was given in 2017 about various kinds of nanotech weaponry that could be rolled out that might relate to a new pandemic or something like that. That lecture is very similar to what was warned about, what was presaged, I guess you could say, in the 2020 NATO study, Cognitive Warfare. And when the Psy-Ops document came out in 2020, it was actually utilized, its principles were utilized by the Canadian government to push a lot of the COVID fear and narrative. So there's an actual lecture that a lot of NATO people in Canada, the Canadian government, utilized this document. They even talk about how they would utilize all this fear. And that anybody who questioned the establishment and the narratives that were being put out would be considered potential enemy combatants. So in other words, the domestic population not wanting to go along with vaccines, not wanting to go along with vaccine passports, vaccine tracking, total surveillance, that would be considered in terms of cognitive warfare, this new version of hybrid warfare, a potential enemy combatant status, and that you could even be linked into this database or whatever. Without knowing it, you would be targeted. And so it's a very ominous dystopian kind of presentation and document where drones, autonomous vehicles, and the development of biological and chemical neuroweapons, as they call it, would be pursued to not just alter, as classical psychological operations did, the ideology of the enemy, but as this document says, to actually change the biology and the brain itself of the enemy. That, again, perfectly overlaps with the lecture from the DARPA guy. And so this kind of weaponization of neuro research, or neuro-ST, as they call it, could mean then that the opponents would not just become passive, but actually might be neutralized, which sounds, of course, like they could put you to death. And so it's no longer just changing the opponent's mind, but exactly what Klaus said: we will change your DNA, we'll change you, we'll be under your skin. That's the real goal. That's exactly what the NATO cognitive warfare document says. And so you understand that the development of controlling both sides of conflicts over the centuries, the mastering of what we call dialectical philosophy from Plato to Marx to Hegel, and subsequent philosophers after that, this really, Darwinism even, you could argue, this really allows the establishment to have this position beyond what most people are involved in terms of conflicts. You could think of it like a circle. And within that circle is the accepted Overton window of what you can and can't talk about, and what types of things are allowed in public, of the questions that are asked. So, for example, you wouldn't be allowed to, it's not even considered within the purview of the possibility to ask a question like, well, could the wars of the 20th century have been intentionally fostered by an elite or a superstructure? That's not an allowed question. It's not within the domains, the parameters, the magic circle of what can and can't be discussed. And so a big part of perception management that Kissinger talks about has nothing to do ultimately with what's true or false, All that matters is managing the public's perception of what things are possible and not possible, what questions can and cannot even be asked. This is also famously covered by the well-known philosopher Eric Voegelin, who talked about how technocracies operate in a neo-Gnostic way. There's a sort of inherent neo-Gnostic principle that it sets the parameters of what questions can and can't be asked. So you're not even allowed to ask a question like, has there been a revolutionary plan for the last several centuries, going back to Billington's Fire in the Minds of Men, theorizing an analysis that you get French revolutionary, communist, socialists, proto-technocrats, even back then? That's not a question. That's a nonsense question. You're not allowed to ask that. And that's why the media, mass media, has been there for so long, to control and set the parameters for the questions that are allowed to be asked and that are not allowed to be asked. Nowadays, media is basically there, I think, to just sort of confuse the public. And so you get this overwhelming, this avalanche of data that's all conflicting and contradictory and confusing. And that's intentional, right? The public doesn't have an education in how to know these things and patterns in history. There are no patterns to history. History doesn't exist, right? Remember 1984, there is no such thing as history. It's whatever the party writes at that moment. And that's all part of that new revolutionary dialectic. Basically, all of modernity is premised on liberalism. And by liberalism, I don't mean GOP, Rhino, that stuff. I don't mean Democrats. I mean post-Enlightenment removal of the notion of all forms of hierarchy in nature, all forms of meaning and principles in the external world. Those don't exist anymore, according to the establishment. And Hegel, I think, is a key figure, because Hegel really said that the state is God, and the state will tell you what's meaningful. That's why it was a very big deal when there was starting to be pushback, a year ago or so, on the notion of whether or not the infants, right, have the principle of being made in the image of God, or have life from the womb, or is the right to life something dictated by the state? In the Hegelian sense, in the technocrat sense, the state dictates when you're alive. And so perhaps you're not alive or conscious until age 3. Maybe you're a potential person, but you're not a human person until age 3. Well, then you could be conceivably aborted up to age 3. And there are some radical people out there who.
So there you go. We're going to rely on Jay Dyer's broad analysis and his ability to draw all these different seemingly disparate facts together into some kind of poignant and meaningful and deliberate lecture for us. So that's why I feel bad for so many people that are going to go to college and waste hundreds of thousands of dollars and go into massive debt just to be sent in some kind of weird, degenerate Fruit Loop, right? And come out with absolutely no skills to deal with the modern world, but just kind of like a head full of neurotic, revolutionary abandonment and inner violence with no ability to express, right? Just with people who are going to come with their genitals clipped off, and they're going to remove their breasts and turn their hair different colors and try do every kind of backflip and try to put themselves into any kind of pretzel that they can in order to somehow defy and break the mold of reality and somehow come out differently and control my gender and control my my rights and control my thoughts and control my everything they can do to try to get everyone else to accept their ideological position when they themselves stand in hatred and violence against everyone else's practice and their personal beliefs and their own views, right? So the whole context of Marxism, the whole extent to which it brings about an end result for the learner is that it brings you into a state of insanity and total poverty and extreme and political extremism. And so with that, we're just going to take a few minutes to go and review exactly the history and the lineage of thinking and philosophers that have brought us to this point in our lives where we're ultimately dealing with the World Economic Forum and the United Nations as it rushes forward to take power in this kind of lull of American idiocy and degeneracy that you see up in the White House, the crackheads running around, the topless transgender men with tits with their shirts off. It's just kind of like a bizarre and deranged show of insanity. In this moment, it's going to be now that they move forward with their plans, and you can see that everyone is rushing forward. You can see the Chinese are making great headway as they begin to, having stolen our technology, having got into the World Trade Organization, having done everything to become a near-peer competitor of the United States. And it's just one stumble, one trip, one moment, knock a couple of our satellites out so we can't control our military grid, and all of a sudden they can just nuke us to the Stone Age, guys. It's really that quick and that simple. And this idea, this illusion that we have, these levels of defense systems that are there to protect us against these things, it's just not true. It's just not there. It's just being wheedled down. It's just being eroded and diminished, just like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, right? Where's our Strategic Petroleum Reserve? Well, it's emptied out. And everything else that is a strategic reserve is emptied out. Our strategic reserve of troops is emptied out. Our strategic reserve of elite billionaires who are on our side, that's emptied out. They've emptied out and gone to the other side. They're all traitors. They're traitors in the White House, traitors in the Pentagon, traitors in the FBI. Look at Director Wray. He's a traitor. They had to finally put a charge on Epps there. That was funny. We've been reporting on that for over a year, that he's just some kind of FBI worshipping little tool that they used to go out there and to create the kind of chaotic environment that they wanted to create so they could try to, Nancy Pelosi's behind it, right? They wanted to create a Fedsurrection. And of course, the Fedsurrection is really coming off the heels of the Michigan Fednapping case, right? The Michigan Fednapping incident, including Gretchen Whitmer, the diabolical and traitorous, horrible witch of an individual in the governor's mansion up there. And with the FBI, of course, the FBI who did that, those individuals who did the horrible entrapment and the roundup that was what they called the Fednapping case, which we just recently seen several of the individuals get let loose of that finally. Like, sanity is finally being restored in the minds of the populace and the judiciary and the actual representatives and I don't know what kind of total madness, mass psychosis came over America that led us to the total tyranny and the total breakdown of law and order and the total casting aside of all constitutional established order and law in this country, and just to follow along with the elitists and the globalists and with China and the Royal Society of the Royal Institute of Science, or whatever morons in London, right? The morons in London. We just went along with that, and the very first people to do it were were Italy, right? Italy was the very first people to mask up at the behest of the Vatican and the Jesuits there. And of course, you can see that Italy is the very first one to have an entire town overrun with Eritrean or Africans or just people from some other place. Say foreigners just show up to your town, and there's 20,000 of them. They just want to jump off the boats and run up into your town and start grabbing your women and flipping over your tables, right? And that's the first for Italy too, right? This is the next wave. This is the next thing. This is the next World Economic Forum, United Nations, World Bank plan, right? To they had to take out Ukraine, right? They need a fucking 15-minute smart city there now, right? Now they're doing that. So there goes Morgan and banking and Chase banking and BlackRock, idiots, billionaires, and just vipers, right? And of course, they think that this world is like some kind of, for them, it's some kind of grand, opulent ivory tower, and they live in it, and they live a grand life. And they have no idea what's coming next. I mean, look at Soros. He's trying to spread his billions around. Oh, his son Alex is 100 times worse than him. Like, who's scared of these little cucks? Because I'm not. I mean, I'll challenge Alex Soros to a cage match. Just put down your money. Okay, tough guy? Just go ahead and meet me in the ring. Okay? And you just go do your training. Get some billionaire training guys to train you. And I'm going to whip your ass. Because I'm just a regular guy. I'm going to whip your ass, Alex, but you have billions, and you can kill off my entire town. Maybe you can put a laser satellite into orbit and zap my entire county and set us all on fire, right? And kill us all. But of course, you're not a real man. You're just a cuck, and you're just a little worm, and you can't do anything other than just basically follow your own father into the pit of hell next, right? That's where he's going. He's had his grand reward here. He had his grand reward. He did everything in his power to become a complete satanic little devil like you, right? Like his son, like you got a little son of Satan over there. And you're going to end up in the same exact pit, in the same exact judgment, under the rule of the very same exact existing God that you deny. So go ahead, go carry on with that. Burn people, use your billions to be a tough guy, 100 times worse than your dad. Do whatever you got to do, Alex, to try to feel better from your weird cuck upbringing. Go smoke crack with Hunter Biden or whatever y'all do. Okay, head off to do that. And we're going to go over here and have a real human existence, a meaningful existence of striving, working hard, developing our spirit in ourselves and our families, actually having real human love, human affection, something that is impossible for you idiots. We're going to have it in spades, right? We're going to be rich in spirit. Okay, we're going to have this grand wealth of spirit of God, right, from God, that's going to come to us in the form of denominations of billions. We're going to have billions in spirit, and you're going to be bereft of any. You're going to be totally impoverished for any spirit at all. You're going to have nothing. You're going to be dry as an arid desert. And let me tell you this. What good is it for any man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? Soros, right? Right? What good is it, Biden, for a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? That's what you have at stake. That's what this is all about. That's why you've been given so much. That's why the red carpet has been unrolled for you, because the tip of it flaps right down into hell. So you follow that red carpet, get into your limousines, follow the helicopter routes, you have your drivers take you where you go, and in the end, you're going to go and plop right down into hell. Okay, so that's your reward in this life. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was worth it to you. But we're going to carry on in the name of God, in the name of truth, in the name of our country, and we're going to have the victory over you, even though you did all that, even though you just spoiled your own soul. As a despotic psychopath, you went and did all that. In the end, we're still going to have victory over you. So we're going to still have the great inheritance that comes from our God. And we're going to have the great inheritance that comes from having the courage and the blood of our ancestors in us. A lot of us are going to die, but many of us are going to live. Many of our children are going to live, and we're going to carry on to dance on your grave.
Other jurisdictions if he feels it's necessary. That was your response, Attorney General, to Senator Grassley's question on March 1st, 2023. You just referenced it when Mr. Bishop was questioning you. Only problem is he'd already been turned down by the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia, Mr. Graves. So he didn't have full authority, did he?
I had an extended conversation with Senator Grassley at the time. We briefly touched on the Section 515 question and how that process went. I've never been suggested.
My point's real simple, Mr. Garland. You said he had complete authority, but he'd already been turned down. He wanted to bring an action in the District of Columbia, and the U.S. Attorney there said, no, you can't. And then you go tell the United States Senate under oath that he has complete authority.
I'm going to say again that no one had the authority to turn him down. They could refuse to partner with him. They could not.
You can use whatever language. Refuse to partner is turning down.
Well, it's not the same under a well-known Justice Department practice.
Here's why the statute of limitations question is important, and Mr. Bishop was getting at just a few minutes ago. Here's why it's important. You let the statute of limitations lapse for 2014, 2015. Those were the years with the felony tax charges where Hunter Biden was getting income from Burisma. Here are 4 facts that I think are so important. Hunter Biden was put on the board of Burisma, made a lot of money, got paid a lot of money over those years, a couple $1 million. He wasn't qualified. Fact number 2, he wasn't qualified to be on the board of Burisma. Not my words, his words. He said he got on the board because of his last name. The brand, as Devin Archer said when he was under oath and we deposed him. Fact number 3, Burisma executives told Hunter Biden, we're under pressure, we need help. Fact number 4, Joe Biden goes to Ukraine, leverages our tax money, American people's tax money, to get the prosecutor fired who was applying the pressure. Interestingly enough, that fact is entirely consistent with what the confidential human source told the FBI, and they recorded in the 1023 form. The same form Mr. Ray didn't want to let this committee and the Congress see. That all happened. That all happened. What I'm wondering is why you guys let the statute of limitations lapse for those tax years that dealt with Burisma income.
There's one more fact that's important, and that is that this investigation was being conducted by Mr. Weiss, an appointee of President Trump. You will, at the appropriate time, have the opportunity to ask Mr. Weiss that question, and he will no doubt address it in the public report that will be transmitted to the Congress. I don't know the answer to those questions.
Did the lawyers just like let it? Did they just like, oh, darn, we let it? Were they careless?
I expect that won't be what he says, but because I
You know that's not the case. Because as Mr. Bishop pointed out, they had a tolling agreement. They talked to Hunter Biden's defense counsel and say, let's extend the statute of limitations. And then at some point, they made an intentional decision to say, we're going to let the statute of limitations lapse. And I want to know who decided that and why they did it.
Mr. Weiss was a supervisor of the investigation at that time and at all times. He made the appropriate decisions, and you'll be able to ask him that question, and he will.
You know why they did it? Everyone knows why they did it. May not say it, but everyone knows why they did it. They did those tax years. That dealt with that involved the president. It's one thing to have a gun charge in Delaware. That doesn't involve the president of the United States. But Burisma, oh my, that goes right to the White House. We can't have that. And we can slow walk this thing along. We can even extend the statute of limitations, and then we can intentionally let it lapse. And we know this investigation was slow. Here's what everyone said. Shapley said, DOJ slow walked the investigation. Ziegler, slow walking in the approvals of everything. This happened at the Delaware's attorney's office and DOJ tax level. Mr. Sobocinski, the FBI agent, said, I would have liked to see things move faster. Ms. Holly said the same. Every witness we've talked to said this thing was slow walked, and we know why. They slow walked it long enough to let the statute of limitations run so they wouldn't have to get into Burisma.
All right. These fiery hearings and proceedings went on all morning. We covered a lot of them during the Alex Jones show earlier today. So for the sake of myself being redundant as I was hosting that, we're not going to go too much into it. But, you know, it's really just a shame. It's a shame that my good friend Merrick Garland is having to deal with this. My friend Merrick Garland, who wants to give me free government housing and free 3 government meals a day in a safe prison cell. It's really disheartening that my good friend Merrick Garland, who just wants to give me a nice, safe place to live for 2 months, is having to deal with it. Here we are. It's the InfoWars War Room, brought to you by InfoWarsStore.com on this Wednesday, September 20th, 2023. And I have a loaded broadcast today. I've got a whole stack of news, and juxtaposed with the political persecution we're seeing from Merrick Garland's Department of Justice, this stack of news dealing with criminal activity running rampant in this country is extremely telling. And there's a lot of different angles and aspects to this. But what should the Department of Justice be really interested in right now? Is it arresting, imprisoning, and putting fear in the hearts with a weaponized government of the opposition of the Democrat Party? Or should it be the skyrocketing crime wave that is only going to get worse now because of some news that we have out of Chicago and some other cases where violent criminals are getting let off with no charges? I mean, folks, stuff you wouldn't even believe is going on out there right now. In fact, one of the biggest serial killers in modern American history, and you don't even know his name. And you don't even know his name. Do you know why? I'll tell you why coming up today on the InfoWars War Room. In fact, the odds are that you didn't even hear about this story. Yeah. One of the biggest serial killers in modern American history. This just happened. This is not an old news story. This is a fresh news story. And most Americans never even heard about it. You're probably tuned in right now, scratching your head. You're thinking, serial killer, mass murderer? What do you mean? What is he talking about? They didn't cover this in the news? No, you didn't hear about Billy Chamirer, did you? You didn't hear about him, did you? The media made sure that that wasn't a household name and a household story, did they? But that's just scratching the surface of this stack of news. I've got a big stack of political news. Is Joe Biden campaigning for Donald Trump right now? I'm a little confused with the messaging coming out of the Biden White House. And of course, this is aside from his embarrassing speech at the UN. More embarrassing moments today. Biden fumbling around with an earpiece as he's supposed to have a dual press conference with the Lula, who's a criminal. The Brazilians supposedly elected a known criminal to be their president. You wouldn't believe it, but it happened. That's what happens in communist countries, and it's really sad for Brazil, a great country that should be a great ally of ours. I've always said the strongest ally in the world for freedom would be the United States, Brazil, and Russia. That would be a powerful ally partnership for global dominance of a free market system that puts people first and sovereign nations first. But we don't get that now. We get a corrupt White House, and then you get a communist in Brazil, and now Russia's been forced into the arms of the Chinese communists. It's all bad geopolitical developments. But a stack of political news today. Donald Trump did have a speech in Iowa. We aired that on the Alex Jones Show. I've got some news, but it's all the same. Just new studies, new reports, all reporting the same thing. You don't want that thing in you, you know? You really don't want that injection inside you. And for those that got it, more reason to be concerned. At this point, you're just hoping you got one of the saline injections and not the, whatever that thing is that they forced into many Americans' bodies. Some big news on the Elon Musk front that we're going to be covering as well. The agenda to sexualize your kids, the liberals love it. They just really, liberal teachers, they just really want to talk to your kids about sex. Weird. It's a weird thing. It's a weird inclination, isn't it? I'm sure that you've probably never had that sort of an inclination, but liberals, specifically ones that get into the classroom, they really like to talk to young children about sex. It's funny, 20 years ago, it wouldn't have even been a debate what we would have called that. But now it's just called modern day liberalism. Modern day liberalism. And so Alex Stringer joining us in the third hour. And then I have another guest joining us in the third hour. I've got a couple legal updates. I've got a couple legal updates and announcements today. And I want to be fully transparent, and I always want to keep you up to date because you've been so supportive of me in my legal fights, not just with financially supporting me at defendowen.com, but I mean all the words of encouragement, all the kind messages, all the prayers, all the love sent. So I always want to keep you updated on the latest. And so we do have a couple updates on my legal situation today. Donald Trump spoke in Iowa today. It was a good rally, not his most fiery rally, but very, very focused. He definitely said some interesting things. And he, of course, once again, filled a massive venue and had people lined up around the arena hours before it started, and even people lining up before the sunrise in Iowa today. Of course, we could challenge Joe Biden to do such a thing, but he never would. He wouldn't even think about it. Physically, I'm not sure he could do a campaign rally speech. Also, who knows if anybody would even show up. That would be too embarrassing for a guy that supposedly got 81 million votes, but can't have anybody show up to a rally. That might have people scratching their heads. Or maybe the Democrats already know that Biden isn't going to be running again. We do have the House panel setting the first Biden impeachment inquiry hearing for next week. So Kevin McCarthy trying to save his political skin here as he's being ripped to shreds by Matt Gaetz. And Gaetz is gaining momentum in what is kind of just a one-off of the Freedom Caucus with his continued resolution voting block of no. Conservative lawmakers force Kevin McCarthy to move forward with Biden impeachment. The Republican-controlled U.S. House Oversight Committee announced their first hearing will take place next week in an effort led by hard-right lawmakers intent on bringing impeachment articles against Joe Biden. And so that's nice. Kevin McCarthy trying to earn some political points here where he's down big in the score. He's almost got nothing. He's an empty suit. So his hand has been forced, and the impeachment inquiry will begin next week. And I don't know whether this is real or not. You may have seen motion by Representative Matt Gaetz to remove Kevin McCarthy as Speaker found in Capitol bathroom. And so it looks like an official letterhead and filing motion from Matt Gaetz' office. It was folded up at a changing station inside a Capitol bathroom. A journalist just happened to find it and say, "Oh, what is this?" Let me tell you. And, you know, I don't do this. I mean, I'll just go ahead and tell you. People dig through Capitol trash. They look because anybody's looking for a story. So they find loose papers or they go into trash. I've had people turn over politicians' documents that have been trashed before and say, "Hey, do you want this? There might be a story here." And I just don't even want to do that. But let me just tell you, this is kind of a normal thing. People looking for stories or whatever, going through trash. And so they find this paper in the bathroom and they open it up, and it appears to be a motion from Matt Gaetz to remove Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. A resolution from Florida Representative Matt Gaetz seeking to vacate Kevin McCarthy's House speakership seat was discovered in a Capitol Hill bathroom yesterday. And journalist Matt Laszlo shared this document that he found. You can find the story at Infowars.com with the supposed document. So again, who knows if this is real or not? It appears to be real, but you know, anybody could go out and make a fake document look like this and plan it for a story. I'm not accusing Matt Laszlo of doing that. But it is interesting. Was this a troll? Was this a real document? You'd think somebody would not want to leave that sitting on the bathroom floor if it was, but nonetheless, I wish it was real. I wish it was real. And maybe it will be soon. And then there's Joe Biden again. Is he campaigning for Donald Trump? Donald Trump just took I wouldn't say a big hit, but he took a gash. He took a gash politically with what he said about abortion during the Kristen Welker Meet the Press interview. And if Kristen Welker had any integrity left when it comes to her journalistic career, she threw all of that out the window with that interview, constantly lying and misrepresenting the facts during that interview. It was a disgusting display. But she did gash Donald Trump a little bit with the pro-life purists specifically. And so Trump took a bit of a gash on that. And then Biden stitched up the wound, tweeting this out. After 50 years of failure with nobody coming even close, I was able to kill Roe versus Wade. This is a truth post from Donald Trump back in May. And so Biden tweets this out, and he says, "Let's be clear, Donald Trump is responsible for ending Roe versus Wade, and if you vote for him, he'll go even further." So after Kristen Welker, the Democrat hatchet woman who sold all of her integrity, gashes Trump in the pro-life movement, Joe Biden and his campaign, or whoever put this up, comes in to stitch up the wound and stop the bleeding, and credits Donald Trump for killing Roe versus Wade and says he would go even further. Wow. Now, again, I'm not making excuses for what Donald Trump said about his pro-life stance in that interview. He's mostly just playing politics with it, like it or not. That's the truth. But Biden rushes in to stop the bleeding. Incredible. I mean, so you got to wonder, the people running Biden's Twitter account are just completely moronic not to realize that they just stopped the bleeding on this issue for Donald Trump. He doubled down. Biden's team doubles down. Today, while Donald Trump takes credit for killing Roe versus Wade, actually, you gave him credit just 24 hours ago. You literally gave him credit. So And then they say Trump takes credit. Well, you just gave him credit. While Donald Trump takes credit for killing Roe versus Wade and would sign a national abortion ban, actually, he said he wouldn't do that in the interview. So these people don't even pay attention to anything. Clearly, they don't pay attention to anything. He said he wouldn't sign a national abortion ban. That's why the pro-life purists were upset with Donald Trump. And now you have stopped the bleeding, and then you've lied about what he said. We will always fight to protect a woman's freedom to choose. And I'm just so sick of this. Freedom to choose. Folks, come on. Honestly, I'm a pro-lifer. I have zero doubt about that. Zero doubt in my mind, I'm a pro-lifer. For me personally, for my life, I'm a pro-life purist. I'm not a political purist. But for me, for my culture, what I want, pro-life purist. But look, if we're going to talk politics on this, folks, 80% of people would get behind a heartbeat bill. If the baby has a heartbeat, you can't kill it. That should be considered murder. And it is. If it's a pregnant woman that gets killed, that's a double murder. That's a double homicide. So this whole freedom to choose, F you, man. You do not have the freedom to murder somebody. Now, Joe Biden did more campaigning for Donald Trump unintentionally today. So we'll continue to cover that for you here on the InfoWars War Room, brought to you by InfoWarsStore.com. Ladies and gentlemen, please keep this show on the air. Shop at InfoWarsStore.com. We've got a huge sale right now on the Trifecta Pack. 3 of my favorite supplements, Bodies, DNA Force Plus, are both on sale, and the Real Red Pill Plus, InfoWarsStore.com. My goodness, Joe Biden is international embarrassment. He just snubbed the president of Brazil on a handshake, and that's not because he's a dirty commie. It's because Joe Biden is an embarrassment. But we'll have that coming up here shortly. Is Joe Biden campaigning for Donald Trump? Gives him credit for killing Roe versus Wade in a time where Trump was bleeding pro-life purists? Joe Biden rushes in to stop the bleeding, says Trump killed Roe versus Wade, and then doubles down on it again? They're not very bright people inside the Democrat Party. And now Joe Biden, because he's campaigning on Bidenomics, well, he's not campaigning, but he's touting Bidenomics. Now, everybody knows what Bidenomics actually means. And in fact, maybe we'll go to some videos of this today, because I've been warning about this. And I'm telling you, the dam is about to break, folks. I'm just telling you, the dam is about to break. But Joe Biden says, this is MAGAnomics. And they tweet it out like it's an actual word that they made up. Actually, it's just a good economy under Trump, but okay, MAGAnomics. An economic agenda that calls for 3 things. Cutting taxes. Are you campaigning for Donald Trump? By the way, notice the lack of interaction on Biden's tweets. This guy. MAGAnomics, cutting taxes. Cutting taxes. Now, they love to do this class warfare. They say, for wealthy and big corporations. Well, it's the wealthy and the big corporations that hire people and give them jobs. The commies haven't figured that out yet, I guess. Cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's just not accurate. And then raising costs for families by gutting investments in the middle class. What does that mean, gutting investments in the middle class? What gutting investments in the middle class? The government investing in the middle class? What is Biden doing that? Because the middle class is shrinking under Joe Biden. The middle class is now the lower class under Joe Biden. And raising costs for families, that's result number 1 from so-called Bidenomics. So I've played the different video compilations of people complaining about their grocery bills and everything. We've done whole segments and whole breakdowns on it. I'm telling you, this dam is about to break, folks, with the economy. It is getting bad. And the grocery bills and the energy bills aren't going down anytime soon. And the gas bills, actually, your price at the pump is now at a record high. And it's only going to be going up as well. Gas prices in LA soared over $6 a gallon as oil keeps climbing. We told you this was going to happen. Never doubt me, folks. It'll probably soon be reaching $7 a gallon. And the only thing Biden can do about it is drain the strategic oil reserves. But there's not much left. So Biden can tap into the strategic petroleum reserves one or two more times before it's empty, before it's completely empty. And Russia and Saudi Arabia, working with BRICS and China to have a gold-backed currency, they're not putting any more oil into the market. So they can keep oil prices down for their own countries, and they are, and then they can raise the oil prices in the United States of America as a direct attack on Bidenomics, because he leaves himself open for attack, because he's a joke and his foreign policy and energy policy is crushing us. So it's now over $6 a gallon. Usually gas prices are really good in Texas. They're approaching $5 a gallon here for premium. I'm getting text messages from people all across the United States sending me their gas prices, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you were right. I didn't think it would get this bad, but I just paid $4.50 a gallon. I just paid $5 a gallon." Never doubt me, folks. And then, in fact, I bet you right now. Okay, it's Wednesday. By the end of the week, Karine Jean-Pierre will make a statement from the White House saying they've lowered gas prices. Of course they will. Because what do they do? What does the White House do every time gas prices go up? They tell you they went down. No, they're at a record high. So here we go. Let's start with the lighter one. Here's an individual comparing grocery bills from when Trump was president to when Biden was president in clip number 8.
This one compared to grocery purchases from 2020 to today, and it's actually insane how much inflation we're seeing in just 3 years. A pound of sliced turkey in 2020 was $3.14. Today, it's $6.72. That's a 114% increase. A pound of ground beef in 2020 was $3.46. Today, it's $5.47, which is a 58% increase. Walmart branded waffles used to be $2.93, and now they're $4.14. Hellmann's mayonnaise used to be $3.77. It's now being sold for $5.48. I think it's a meme that Americans put mayonnaise on everything. I like it on sandwiches, but anyway, 16 ounces of raw honey used to be $6.88. Any guesses on what it's being sold for right now? Well, she checked on the Walmart app, and today it's being sold for $10.97. 3 pounds of Walmart bacon used to be $11.98, and now they're charging $16.48. It's like everything is consistently up 40, 60, even 100%. This gluten-free stir fry cost her $2.73 in 2020, and now it's $4.18 in 2023. These Walmart brand cereal bars were $5.58, and today they're selling for $7.44. And just looking at this woman's purchases, she's not buying brand name, organic, grass-fed groceries or anything like that. These are Walmart brand prices, and even with all that, her grocery bill is still up over 50% in just 3 years.
Now, we're going to show you something a little more heartbreaking on the other side, but let me explain further here, because you could do this for yourself potentially. If you order your groceries online, you can order them on Amazon or the Whole Foods deal that they have, or Walmart. Even local grocery stores here in Texas now have online shopping. And so you can actually go and you can look at your receipts and you can look at your bills from 2020 or before, and then you can look at them now, and the prices you'll see are different. And in fact, I forget what it was. I just had to order something on Amazon that I hadn't ordered in like 4 years. And I ordered it, and I was like, wait a second, I don't remember this being so expensive. Same thing. Now, the challenge is understanding that this is Bidenomics and that this is energy policy. When you shut off energy and that causes energy prices to go up, everything goes up. So the challenge is now to get people to understand, this is Bidenomics. This isn't just inflation. This isn't just normal activity. This isn't just, it's a different year, different time. This is 100% the result of Bidenomics. Well, this individual understands it because he can't even afford food anymore, as he says, trying to hold tears back in clip 7.
Joe, I didn't eat, Joe. Joe, I didn't eat today, Joe. You know why, Joe? You want to know why? Because, Joe, I got a car. Joe. Look at me, Joe. Joe, my feet is on land. My feet is on land. I can run into a landmine. This is all on you, Joe. I hope you're paying for my funeral, Joe. Now I gotta walk these streets because the gas price is too high. What are you doing us like this, Joe?
So he gets it. I hope everyone gets it. Now, liberals can't even be real with themselves. They can't even be honest with themselves. But folks, we have to make sure that people understand this is Bidenomics. Your price at the pump doubling, your grocery bill doubling, and let's be perfectly clear, that's what's happened. Your grocery bill has doubled, your price at the pump has doubled, and it's likely that your taxes have doubled as well. That's the situation I'm dealing with. I bet that you in the audience are dealing with the exact same situation. That's Bidenomics.
So there you go. That's just a little reality check for everybody. That's just a little bit of dose of what's really going on out there. It's the banned, the suppressed thinking of Americans. It's the censored, verboten, disallowed ideas that we're all thinking. And so to some degree or another, whether we can pull down our mask in public and be able to lean over to one another and speak to one another in private and discuss these issues and discuss what we're really thinking, we have to go to what's banned. We have to go to discuss what is disallowed, what the technocracy is refusing to admit is reality. It goes all the way back to the Hunter Biden laptop. And as you go along and as it furthers, the whole disaster and the calamity furthers, and the media, the corporate media control complex begins to show itself for what it is more and more, I think it becomes apparent that more and more of the people around the world and Americans are going to pay attention. And you can see that these new generations of young people that are going through these public schools are not going to be allowed to think or do the math or do the reasoning or understand the social implications or comprehend the real science. Okay, so everything from here on out for them is going to be totally managed and totally part of the brainwash, influence, and propaganda campaign that's being pushed into public schools. Okay, so you're going to have to be responsible for making sure your kids come out the other side of childhood and become adults and become human beings, rather than these kind of deformed, reprobate, pedophile apologists, that you see, or transgender castration, chemical and surgical, like, allowing and applauding and being proactive movers of that agenda. It goes along with the Planned Parenthood individuals who harvest the fetus tissues, the little organs in the baby's little heart and all the different, things that they can grab onto to sell and get their Lamborghinis. So as we go forward, this is ultimately the final reality check for America. And if you're not able to find within yourself a soul, then you're being winnowed out. Okay, if you no longer can see that the little baby that's kicking in the belly of the mommy is alive and ready to become part of the human population and join its family, if you're ready to murder those children, then you're being winnowed out. If you're ready to sell out your American heritage and your Constitution and your values, and that of your neighbors too, it's not just you selling out and wearing a mask and taking the Pentagon juice and just wherever they say, right? Bill Gates comes running out with his new microbe soft jab, right? You're going to take that, line up and take it all. And you're going to be pissed at everyone else who doesn't want to take it. And you're going to try to make us take it. So that's where you ultimately find people resisting and trying to go back to their constitutional roots and to bear their arms and use their freedom of press and speak freely and use the freedom of speech and use all their constitutional rights to ultimately overthrow your tyranny and your disgusting plebiscite of perverts and just cast you down into the pit where you came out of, and it's your fault that you let yourself become degenerate like that. It's your fault that you walked your own self right into the schools of the young people and taught them about sex when that was you're there to teach art or something, right? I mean, all these perverted and disgraceful agitators and assaulters of our youth, and all these individuals who ultimately we have to confront, even if they're being empowered by the DOJ or the Department of Defense or even the military, the Army. We can't be scared. We have to ultimately separate ourselves from that, even if the Army wants to do some kind of draft. I think that we put thumbs down on that idea. And we as the American people get prepared to face the enemy and the total onslaught that's coming and face it together as a family. We don't need to send our sons off to die somewhere when the battle is here at the home front. We need our sons here on the front line with us. And if there was some kind of serious battle and serious like righteous war over there, sure, we would, we would discuss that with our families and we would go off to fight that war and etc. But ultimately, come on, let's be serious now. Whatever they're doing over there with the military and the Pentagon is just about the New World Order. It's just about the deep state keeping control. It's about, running all these billions and billions of dollars through the Ukraine so they can take it back and launder it, bring it back in the United States and pay themselves. And, Joe Biden, Mr. 10%, right? The big guy can keep getting his cut, even though, they're all 1 foot into the grave, right? Even look at Hunter Biden. Is he 60 yet? Is 60 the new 40, or what's the deal with that? Like you're looking like an old ass man. I wonder if he still gets all the young, like, you ever see the laptop? Don't look. You'll just get on a list and you'll have to go get your soul right with God. It's messed up. That's what's on there. It's just really, it's really so messed up when they say laptop from hell. That's really what they mean. It's a collection of illegal porno that Hunter Biden did drugs, and a collection of himself doing it and himself having like sex parties with his own family members, so and I think the Bidens are just symptomatic of, we're catching the fringe and low life, like middle class elites, right? The elites that are below the poverty line, they were just catching out, little glimpses of what they do inside their disgusting, vile, reprobate lives, right? That's what they're all doing. I think they are adrenaline junkies and crackheads to boot. And Oprah and Hillary, and they're all part and parcel of the same thing. They'll try to get control of the power of the state to come after us, and just like Hillary they went and sent some guys to prison for a meme. I think that's all of us, guys. We better go find that guy's meme and meme the hell out of it, and all just become an overwhelming force together. Because if we don't hang together, we're definitely going to hang separately.
That's right. It's time for a word from our awesome and exciting and sexy sponsor, Wendy's Boutique Limited. You guys remember how this goes? Wendy's Boutique Limited is the hottest designer couture online. 2023 is limited catalog is here, hottest new styles, limited selection, and everything you need to be an amazing and incredible woman. And of course, at Wendy's Boutique, we do not suffer the left's disappropriation of womanhood into weird transgender debauchery over here. Wendy's Boutique is all woman. And we have amazing Van Cleef and Arpels jewelry, incredible. Marco Bizio. I see right here on the front page, I hear sale on Savage Christian Dior cologne. Of course, everybody loves that. It's a bestseller. I see Hermes watches, WB Fine Jewels of the highest order. Wendy's Boutique Limited is boutique supremacy online. If you don't have wendyslimited.com, you don't have anything, guys. And we have, of course, up here on the front deck, you see Prada purses, the most incredible jewelry. Everything here is absolutely guaranteed to be the best price and absolutely 100% pure couture designer labels and fine designer jewelry. At Wendy's Boutique Limited, you have to come check out the rage. Of course, Wendy's Boutique Limited recently canceled Balenciaga because Balenciaga is trash. Wendy'sLimited.com is everything you need.
So the cabal or the cartel that we really need to be focusing on here is the cabal and the cartel that engineered and designed the Order of Skull and Bones. And of course, if you listen to Steve Bannon enough, we need to get an exorcist in there and cast the devil out of him, because he is just absolutely gaslighting, because he knows full well that the cartel or the cabal here that's running the oral bonanza there in Texas is the Knights of Malta, and it's run through the Order of Skull and Bones out of Yale. And of course, that's where you get this Yale wing of the CIA That's where you get this whole issue that we're having with a death struggle within the Republican Party for the soul of America. And of course, you can see that the Biden's soul of America is already going down into the pit. But for the rest of us who are not willing to give up our Bibles and our gunpowder and our glorious Constitution and our glorious Protestant Republic and our constitutional system of checks and balances to carefully order a democratic empowerment of the people here through the political system that we have, and it's our Bill of Rights, and it's our Declaration of Independence, and it's our Constitution, and really it's the Federalist Papers too. We have to go to that because the Federalist Papers put into detail the thoughts and ideas that go behind the orchestration of the constitutional checks and balances, the tertiary system of control laid onto the democracy so that it could be a republic, a constitutional one. So in order for us to all, have this process of deliberate freedom and individual rights, we have to be people who protect each other's, borders and respect each other's property boundaries and each other's rights. And so you can see here that the ultimate exposure of this particular wing of the Republican Party that's been in control for so long, as it worked with the Clinton Initiative, as it was part and parcel of the dialectic controlling the Washington, D.C. for so long under Papa Bush. And it's time for us to stop being shut down by these ridiculous buzzwords and idea viruses that ultimately just seem to control our ability to speak freely and have the courage in public and out in society to be to think our real thoughts, and to just, we have to stop having this camouflage where we go around and try to, we're all warriors on the social media internets, right? But when it comes down to being in public and just interacting as an American people, you can see the conflict that is created by these Hegelian demagogic recipes for internecine infighting and warfare between us as a people. So it's time for us to ultimately see how we have to stand up for our own beliefs, and we have to protect our children, and we have to protect our values, but we have to also see how we're being drawn systematically into this process of order out of chaos, or this destructive willingness of the elites to put us through a democide, put us through a depopulation, put us through blasting cities, right, and wiping away whole segments of the world fabric, as far as classic French or Swedish or German society, just going to be wiped away. The war of demographics, as they they can afford with their billions, their infinite, endless supply of cash to bring in foreign invaders on every shore, right? On every shore, the poor and the hapless, uneducated, insane masses are systematically shipped over and carefully injected into the main heart and soul of Europe and America and Canada, all across the world. And so ultimately, in order to be able to disentangle ourselves from this, we have to know that we're going into a fifth generation warfare mode where the digital AI automated weaponry of the future is going to be unleashed on a biblical level. So you can just go into the book of Revelations and start reading it and try to visualize that a little bit. But you have to be prepared for ultimate struggle. And it's not the kind of trench warfare where we run across the battlefield and face bayonets, but it's not any different, because now the bayonets have changed, but the way of trying to wipe out whole people groups, the way of implementing genocide, the way of trying to exterminate populations is being done through obfuscation and through occult means, so that it's not visible and people are just unwittingly going into the propaganda and the brainwash and taking the shots and just going into the gas chambers willingly without understanding the nature of the battlefield. So now it's time for you to start to look at what's happening. And of course, Steve Bannon is not going to say it because he's gaslighting us all with his kind of marshaling the unwashed and Walmart masses to battle, But ultimately, we're not here to be conservatives for the old line, ultramontane orders of chivalry and knighthood nobility that bend the knee to the Pope. So we're not interested in that. We're American revolutionaries. We don't have Christmas trees in our houses. We're not Pollyannas. Okay, we understand what true Protestant biblical religion is, which mandates against having such ridiculous anti-Christ masses. So we don't have Antichrist masses, and we don't have Antichrist mass trees decorated on Babylonian December 25th either, which is, of course, the ancient worship of the sun god and the rebirth of the sun god, when people would celebrate and sacrifice children in Egypt and Babylon. And of course, if you knew your history, if you could read, you would know not to participate with Roman religion like that and pretend like you're an American and a Christian and a Republican, because you're none of those things if you're participating in those wicked and diabolical. And of course, it's very hard. I understand. I had to go through it myself. I understand how it is to unbrainwash yourself and unscrew your head from the, Dr. Seuss, Grinch Stole Christmas kind of levels of brainwash and systematic reinforcement of Roman religion and Roman ideology across the world. But it's not one or the other. You have to understand that America was established in the Reformation, and was the Puritans and the Baptists and the Christians who came here were fleeing the papists. They were fleeing the Roman Catholics because they were burning them at the stake by the hundreds of thousands and putting them through inquisitional dungeons and all, right? I mean, we were held in shackles by papal kings and Jesuit popes and lords, and we came here and set up a system of democracy where the people, the rabble, right, the low caste commoners, all were empowered to have a vote and have a say and have a share in the direction of the government and the nation. So this establishment of free men out of slaves and indentured servants and whipped papal dogs who came here to flee the starvation in Ireland. They call it the potato famine. It was a forced starvation. So we don't have time to go into all of that, of course, but we have to go back to Steve Bannon and check once more and remind him that the devil that needs to be cast out is over there with him, the Jesuits and the popes, and his constant gaslighting about what is really going on, because we know that the Bushy Yale side of the elite Republican Party, which they were happy to vote for many, many decades, now they're trying to throw it over. But that was, of course, the empowerment of the system of Skull and Bones, 322. And of course, you have to understand how that was a system of ultramontane knighthood, an occult Illuminati sector that was hidden from in plain view right there in the Yale campus since 1833 in New Haven, Connecticut. And of course, the Knights of Columbus were also established at the same time in New Haven, Connecticut at 1832. In New Haven, Connecticut, where the Knights of Columbus were established at the same time as Skull and Bones. So they're just you would go see Jeb Bush. He's not a Yale. He didn't go to Skull and Bones fraternity, but he is, of course, a Knight of Columbus. So they're just different halves of the same coin. So it's important for you to know this information so you can stop being a fake Republican. And if you want to repent and put away your Roman Catholic ritualism and take away the Christmas trees and the false lighting up the midnight, right? Isn't that Luciferian? That's what Lucis is. That's what Lucifer was all about, lighting up the darkness with his created false light. That's what you do with your weird star on the top of the tree. You don't know anything about the scriptures. You guys just go along with the flow of society, of the occult priestcraft, as they feed down your throat the syncretism of pagan systems into this false Christianity, this anti-Christianity. That's why we understand and we point out that the Pope of Rome is the Antichrist and the system of that. They are seated on the seven hills, and they're on the hill of Vaticanus, which was if you go back and know your etymology and you know your Latin, you know that was the hill of the winged serpent, where the temple of Janus stood. That was Vaticanus. So over there in the Vatican, where they preach, this false globalist Christianity, but really what they have for you is a system of Egyptian and pagan sun worship. And of course, everyone knows it. So if you want to come out of that, I say, come out of Babylon, my people, come out. It's the scriptures. Come on out and join the true Christianity. Read the scriptures for what they are. Read the Gospels. Get out that Dewey Reams. Get over to the King James Version, which is much better. It's not perfect, but it's much better. And you can get a more crisp outline of what Jesus' actual doctrine was. And you can become a true Christian. You can become a true Republican. And you can become a true American, because that's what America was set up for. It was set up as a bulwark of freedom and freedom of religion against the despotism of papal kings and religious systems of religious murder of Protestants and Baptists and Huguenots and Jansenists and the Gallicans and did I say Huguenots, the Waldensians, and also the Hussites, right? They were also burned at the stake. And just as the Calvinists were definitely burned at the stake, just like the Anabaptists. They were absolutely run out of Europe. They barely made it before they were just completely just extinguished out of existence because the Jesuits would ultimately be the ones running the Inquisition after they took it away from the Dominican priests who they had basically for centuries run the Inquisition so poorly. It was a bloody disgrace on history. It's so depraved and such an atrocity that even Scientology boasts that the fabric of existence and eternity was actually torn by the bloody and horrific, indescribable crimes of the Roman Inquisition. So all you today who are Catholics and go in there, blah, 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 take part in that weird magic, do all that sorcery, and just keep doing the ritual over and over again. It says right there in the scriptures, don't participate in repetitious prayers and rituals. So it says it right there. Don't to pray to idols. You're in there praying to all the idols are in there. So I mean, I'm sorry for your fate. What will happen to all the godless idolaters? But you have to come out, read the scriptures, and have a relationship directly with Jesus Christ. You can't put your priest up there as like a secretary to handle that for you. Sorry. So as we're going forward here, let's take a listen to Steve Bannon, as we just must, and correct the record there when they obviously are getting it wrong.
Okay, this audience, you're having a massive impact. As you know, you're a protagonist driving the action. Kevin McCarthy, because Matt Gaetz is going at noon to lay out the case. Remember, his case about McCarthy is all of it. It's the spending. It's the no term limits votes. It's no action on the southern border. It's it's obviously the impeachment, delaying and trying to throw out shiny toys. McCarthy's just announced that he will make a statement at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We will try to pick that up and cover it live. So a lot going on this morning. We're also going to move some people around on the show today. We were packed. We might have to bump a person to afternoon. So you're going to want to get all 4 hours of the war room. Mike Benz ran the cyber desk at State for President Trump, also one of his speechwriters, one of the top guys in cyber. We just talked about a mafia-like crime family that now is going to go, and don't believe Morning Joe. They're getting crushed. They never thought we would have the stones even to go forward with the impeachment inquiry, because the information is going to come out is going to shock the nation. Mike Benz, you've been following and put up some amazing tweets late last week and over the weekend that ties what I call another mafia crime family, another mafia story that connects the impeachment trial of Ken Paxton, which really MAGA's on trial. It's Roe versus MAGA, the Bushes versus MAGA, all the way to 9/11 on what you call the geopolitics of oil in West Texas. What do you mean by this, sir?
Sure. So, Steve, as you know, my focus is the censorship industry. But to disentangle what's at the heart of social media censorship, you really need to understand the military industry, the finance industry, and the energy industry. And there's no place where that more sort of acutely comes together than in the geopolitics of West Texas. And what I mean by that is when Trump came to power in 2016, he didn't just defeat the Clinton dynasty. He also defeated the Bush dynasty. And the Bush dynasty grows out of this oil intelligence, Defense Department, State Department, CIA wing. You can almost think of politics in this country before 2016 as a kind of constant struggle between the Yale wing of the CIA and the Texas A&M wing of the CIA, if you will, in terms of the foreign policy machinations that come out of the State Department. When Trump came in and defeated both of those factions, they essentially banded together. And in West Texas produces more oil and gas than almost every country on earth. The largest oil field in Texas, the Permian Basin, produces more oil than the largest oil field in Saudi Arabia. There's a grand Ukraine energy play here, which involves privatizing Naftogaz and then killing Gazprom to capture the the energy market, the LNG market, by taking all of this precious West Texas oil and gas and then shipping it. You ship it in containers, you liquefy the natural gas, and then you sell it at massively marked up prices to a captive market in Europe, and that secures windfall profits for Chevron, Exxon, Halliburton, and Shell, all of whom signed multi-billion-dollar deals with the government of Ukraine before the 2014 war broke out with Russia. They have a huge military interest in recapturing that territory to preserve and protect those investments, and Trump's foreign policy threatened all of that. And so what you see manifest here in the Ken Paxton impeachment is the same thing you actually saw with Joe Biden in Ukraine. It's about controlling the prosecutors because that's how you control the politics. And so Ken Paxton went very hard on the Biden administration. He actually was the sponsor of the best anti-censorship bill in the country, the Texas anti-censorship social media law. And he was then impeached, it turns out, by a Bush cabal, including George P. Bush, who ran against him for attorney general. So what you have here essentially is the use of the Pentagon, the State Department, and the CIA to secure and protect lucrative business deals for this Yankee cowboy alliance.
Talk to me about how the folks down at, because this is responding with folks in Texas, the grassroots down there are now in a pitched battle against the Bush wing of this. So are the people starting to understand? Maybe they don't understand the details of this of what this cabal or cartel that you put together. But do you think that this is now open conflict between the last remnants of the Bush hold on political power?
It certainly is. And what it reflects is a conflict of interest between stakeholders in the American empire and the citizens of the American homeland. This was not really a civil war in the GOP until the fruits of globalization started to turn ill. That is, during the bulk of the 20th century, I don't think this civil war within the GOP would have manifested, because what was good for West Texas was generally good for the people who lived in the American homeland. Gas prices were low, export markets were secured, it increased American jobs and prosperity. But then as the wealth that spilled over from this small coterie of stakeholders in our foreign affairs mafia started to really only benefit them, the people who started to challenge globalization started running up more and more against this same Bush family dynasty legacy. And now you're right, it is coming to a pitched battle, and this is the fight of the century.
Well, the way you describe this is like, you remember the founders were mesmerized by Republican Rome and built many of our institutions on the inspiration from the Roman Republic. The way you describe this, if you look at the Biden family, and because he's been involved since the 1970s, 1980s, the Clintons and the Bushes, you're talking about families that have been deeply embedded into the administrative state, not just elective politics, but the administrative state for over a half a century. Is this like late Republican Rome, where you had these major families that basically ran the apparatus, and that's one of the reasons the whole thing crumbled at the end? Their corruption, their uniparty corruption in late Republican Rome led to their overthrow. Is that a similar? We're going to do a similar thing, because people always talk about we're like the year 300 with the empire. Is what we're fighting for now really the ability to get our republic back and destroy these families that are essentially oligarchs?
Well, it's hard to argue with that. The Kagan family has essentially been in control of Ukraine policy for several generations. Even Tony Blinken, his father, essentially ran the CIA Voice of America archive for the George Soros family. And even the George Soros story has now been passed down from father to son, as Alex Soros now controls the $30 billion Open Society Foundation. Milton Friedman once said, that as individualistic as he's known for, this is actually a family society, not so much an individual society. And most of the time, that's for the best. It incentivizes a lot of wonderful things. The issue is you now have a sort of mafia family more than anything, and it's bipartisan, I should say, in a way that sort of fuses these bloodlines into political power. Like, for example, George Soros is a large stakeholder in Halliburton. Halliburton was run by the chairman was Dick Cheney, and Halliburton holds the oil contracts for processing the oil fields in Ukraine. So, this sort of West Texas oil story is deeply fused with Wall Street and London stakeholders. The only people who really don't have a seat at the table are the ordinary, everyday American people.
And that's why the Ken Paxton, this is why the Ken Paxton trial was so important. This is a populist movement versus the kind of mafia Bush family down in Texas, this fusion of intelligence, defense contracting, the State Department, and of course, oil and gas. Benz, where do people go to find your social media and your writings of this? Because it's very enlightening.
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Mike Benz Cyber, all one word. And my foundation is at foundationforfreedomonline.com. Our mission is to restore the golden age of the internet.
But despite the difficulties I have, the geopolitics, Malthusian programs of world domination and global governance, you see that's ultimately coming out of the World Economic Forum. And like we always say, we charted that back to Henry Kissinger and the Harvard Review, funding Klaus Schwab. And Klaus Schwab also, was ultimately one of the heads on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. So it's really just, like I said, the externalization of this entire system out into the open, and the actual seeming uselessness of these global echelons and these massive monolithic globalist mechanisms, like an engine for global government, are coming about. So you can see that the small r republic, Constitutional Republic of America, has been inverted to become an imperial structure. And then, of course, you can see that all the independent nations of Europe are now subsumed into the EU, like a similar imperial structure. And it wasn't to enhance or empower the individual states of Greece and France and Italy and England and Spain. Ultimately, the British got out of it. But all the independent nations and very interesting classical historical legacies and ethnicities of the Czechs and of the Romanians and the Germans is all being completely paved over now. The way that the West was won, like how they paved over the Cheyenne and the Pawnee and the Sioux Indians, right? All the tribes of Indians, the dozens and dozens of tribes, well, they all got paved over. And so that's what's happening to the Swedish. They don't understand what's happening to them. The people are coming up their windows like medieval style on little homemade ladders and stabbing them on the way in the house to rape their wife and kids. And they're just standing there videotaping it for Twitter. It's insane. It's totally insane what's going on. But we here in the West are hopefully doubling down on our ability to have home protection and to ultimately protect ourselves at home. I think that's the best thing you can do for your neighbor and for yourself and for your environment too. In order to save your environment, I think it's best that you are a armed citizen, an armed free man, understanding that your local county and state government are only limited by your right to consent. So as we go forward, we just have to say that ultimately we decry the papacy and the system of antichrist idolatry out of there, but we are fighting to protect the rights of religious freedom in this country for all people. So if you want to continue to persist to be a Roman Catholic, even though it's not what we suggest or recommend, it's your right to do it, and we will shoot the people that are ultimately coming to take away your rights to be a Roman Catholic. You know why we'll do that? Because we're Protestants. And as Protestants, we're ultimately going to defend the rights of ourselves and our Quaker neighbors and our Presbyterian friends down the road and our Amish individuals over there who like to, practice their own liberty and their own freedom as they see fit. And we want to do that for ourselves too. And so we can't have you being rounded up for your religion and expect that our religious liberties are protected, and they're not. So the argument about Protestantism and even Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism and all that interesting historical narrative, as mysterious and fascinating as it is really not relevant now, because now we have to protect the rights of men to have the liberty of their own conscience. And so hopefully this will speak to something historically true and relevant impression to our brothers who are considering that they have to go and see the monstrance and the mass and to partake in some kind of holiness and partake in some kind of like physical body and blood of Jesus Christ in order to be saved or have remission of sins or have your conscience cleared or all that. It's something that is unnecessary as we think that is for ourselves and our families. We hope that you continue to have the freedom to do that in America. And of course, at the very beginning of America, there wasn't very many people who were here who were Roman Catholics because it was a place of wildness and the edge of civilization, where the frontier, where only pilgrims and Protestants fleeing for their lives away from the Inquisition would be allowed. So ultimately, we can see that even as these Roman Catholics here in America begin to fight for their own freedom, they're ultimately becoming separated out as liberal Catholics or heretical Catholics by their archdiocese and those who are in the Vatican power structure. And they control your religion. They control whether you have absolution. They control whether you can receive Mass freely. And then if you can't receive Mass from them and you receive Mass from someone else, you have to recognize that ultimately it's about your conscience. It's about your sense of security in your soul and your religious beliefs. It doesn't have really to do with the magic of some certain priest or some certain archdiocese. You have to find a way to fundamentally, and you're gonna end up becoming a part of a church that is a Reformed Catholic Church, because the Vatican power structure over there has led you astray. And as you go back to try to find your footing again as real Roman Catholics of conscience, you're going to find yourself separating from the globalist power structure elite of the Vatican. And then they tether themselves to your soul to give you absolution from your sins. So if you need to understand that you're going to find Jesus Christ is the person who will give you absolution for your sins, and you flee from their ritualism, and then you end up over here with a priest who says, I will give you communion. I'm not going to hold some kind of weird Vatican bull against you and push you out into excommunication. I'm going to bring you into the community of the saints. And now you've done what the Vatican power structure and the elite in the Vatican have told you not to do. You become heretics, according to them. Not according to me. I'm a Protestant. I was always a heretic the whole time. Even when I was a young man, they brought me into the catechism very early, as even a boy. But I rejected that, and I understand that those were sins. I mean, it was a little boy. I mean, you can't hold a little kid against what they're just trying to program you, and you just go along with it because you get a candy or whatever. But the deal now, as a conscience and grown man, as a man of conscience and a man who's a Protestant, I respect your beliefs, and I respect your fight for freedom against those who would try to govern your own conscience, whether you would like to have the Mass in Latin or you would not like to have it in Latin Mass, or if you would like it, or you would like the Tridentine situation, whatever. There's all these situations. And so as the control of the Jesuit Pope tries to strangle out your own conscience, and you're put between a rock and a hard place, you're welcome to the club. Welcome to the Protestant Reformation, baby. Welcome to what we've been dealing with for the last couple centuries since Martin Luther. Okay, you don't have to come all the way over here and jingle the tambourine and sing gospel hymns with us, but you got to recognize how the whole structure of the power elite, the domination, even moving towards this environmentalist stuff and the Depop message, it's lining up with the World Economic Forum, and so the power elite in the Vatican are just part and parcel with the power elite in the CCP and the power elite in Washington D.C. and in London, etc. So I would just point out to you that we are now all brothers under the same banner of the liberty of conscience and the freedom of our religion and the American principles that our forefathers here won us and fought for, and we should fight for them together. We should fight as Americans of different religious conscience against a singular system of global imperialism and global despotism that I have been calling the Antichrist. And you can say, well, we disagree with our Pope, or whatever you want to call it. I disagree too. And we're going to continue to disagree. And when they come to destroy the heretics, which they consider themselves empowered to do, we will resist. So that's what this is all about. So, Steve Bannon doesn't like being persecuted by the power structure in the state because of his religious convictions. Well, my brother, welcome to the club of the history of the Protestant Reformation for the last couple centuries, buddy. Welcome to the club. Welcome to the real American fight for freedom. Now that you have skin in the game, now that it matters, now that you have these sycophant Obama worshippers up in the White House coming to try to roll up little, Catholic believers with their little rosaries, trying to hold to their old ways. Come on. What is going on here? This is outrageous, and it's outrageous for you, and it's outrageous. It was outrageous for us in Ruby Ridge. It was outrageous for what happened in Waco. I didn't hear any pissed off Catholics then. You go roll up some Catholics, all of them, they're angry at the FBI. Well, we've been having problems with this going back to the Oklahoma City bombing and the Elohim City. There's issues there. Let's just point out there's issues there with the involvement of the federal government on the first 9/11 attack in 1993 or whenever that was, when they gave the terrorists or whatever the bomb to blow up. And so these are the difficult issues that we're facing. We're facing a deeply entrenched, deep state power structure that's now turned our small r federalized little republic, constitutional republic, into a tyrannical military government. And it's now our problem because the rest of the world is suffering as they've bringing in the granular pathogens of our demise over the border. The Darien Gap, bringing them in like an orc army, hordes of desecrators coming to loot and burn, loot and murder. BLM is coming. So it's time for us as Americans to get over our petty differences. They like to hold these rosaries and pray to them. I don't think you need to do that, but they like it. But we're not going to let anybody hurt them because they do that, right? And we expect the same American consideration in return because we over here choose to be spreaders of the gospel of Jesus Christ as evangelicals because we evangelize, we spread the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ everywhere we go. And so ultimately you can see that those who they're targeting and they're harming in this country aren't like Jehovah's Witnesses. They aren't Mormons. They aren't Seventh-day Adventists. The people that they're targeting are the people who have the most conscience in play in the largest block of those who are religious believers of conscience in America, just like they targeted the Muslims on 9/11, guys. So we have issues with it. We have issues with what happened with 9/11. So as Steve goes off, he seems unconscious of the problems we've had with the deep state government, going back to Daddy Bush and the Yale elites and the CIA, and we have problems with 9/11. So let's just bring it up. Let's talk about it, Steve Bannon. You have to stop gaslighting your audience and pretending like you don't have full knowledge of some of the things that are really good. People don't want to admit it. The towers to tunnels organization carries on. Everyone puts in $1. They ring the bell. Nobody wants to admit something's wrong. Something's wrong. And individuals over there who live in Waco ranches in Waco, Texas now have got to answer for it. They've got to talk about what happened on 9/11. I mean, what is going on? And of course, people will get killed for it. A lot of people got killed in the cover-up of JFK. A lot of people are going to get killed in the cover-up of 9/11 still. And so we are people of conscience who aren't afraid to go to our Maker. We're not afraid to go to the Lord, having done our very best to live the lives that He required in the Word and to be speakers of the truth and not lay down like cowardly little dogs and continue to repeat the lie. So even so, there's so much misinformation and disinformation rolling, and there's still so much that the Republican Party has got to answer for in this terrifying reality that it refuses to face. And we continue to have these bitter battles over what's a conspiracy theory and all this. We are totally enmeshed in the deep state psyops, and we're coming to blows as Americans against one another when we need to find who our real enemy is. So let's talk about it.
Merrick Garland is not a good person, not a good American. That blubber and open, and to think that the country took him in, and he said it was about the rule of law. It was the American people that took his predecessors in, the American people. And many of those people, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those people that he's put in prison illegally, are the ones that went and liberated. The French didn't do it. The Italians didn't do it. The Scandinavians didn't do it. The British were our sides, but the American people in this heartland did it. And that's the thing. He is a purely evil individual. He's a purely evil individual. Let me repeat that. He's a purely evil, and right there he lied and perjured himself time and time again and obfuscated. And that's what, by the way, we could have doubled that to 30 minutes of the intensity, the anger of the people's representatives about this guy lying. And to him to make that big blubbery open and then to say, I don't know what a traditional Catholic is. He couldn't answer the question. He couldn't answer the question and never really answer the question about the Catholics, which that memo started about my parents who were the hobbits of the hobbits, Latin Mass parish. He is an evil individual, and he will pay for that evilness when we imprison him after we take over in 2025 for what he has done to this country. And he perjured himself right there. Thomas Massey, he perjured himself. You're telling me that the Attorney General, Kelly, help me out here. You've been on this more than anybody. Are you telling me that the Attorney General of the United States, 3 years after this thing, doesn't know how many FBI assets, how many federal assets they had in the crowd around January 6th? How dumb does he think the American people are? He is an evil man. He is a weak man, and he will pay for his evilness, and he will pay for his weakness, and he will pay for what he did with to this country. Julie Kelly.
You know, Steve, there's a good chance that he doesn't know exactly how many FBI informants or undercover agents were in the crowd provoking the events that day. But for him to suggest that there were none, maybe he needs a briefing from his own line prosecutors who are handling the January 6th trial.
Julie, hang on, stop. He's Attorney General of the United States. This is the most it's the biggest. I follow somebody named Julie Kelly. It's the biggest prosecution. They brag about this in the history of the nation. This is bigger than getting the communists in the 40s and 50s. This is bigger than getting the Simonese Liberation Army, the KKK, the Black Panthers, all of them in the 1960s. This is bigger. This is a bigger investigation than getting the Islamic jihadist terrorists that took down the World Trade Center and killed 2,900 Americans in cold blood. They brag about this is the biggest in history. The biggest in history. How can he not know a basic question in 3 years? Like, hey, Chris Wray, just tell me. I'm going to take a note here. How many total feds have? It's a lie. It's a bald-faced lie. It's a bald-faced lie, ma'am.
It is a bald-faced lie because he definitely knows, as I said, that there were some. He may not know the exact number, but he is lying, and he's lying on a number of fronts. But I'm going to tell you something, Steve, and guess what, Merrick Garland? I think about my grandparents a lot, too, when I'm covering January 6th, because they went to Europe in late 1944, 45, and helped save your continent and save many of your relatives. And you know what I think when I think of my grandparents who are gone? That this is not the country that they wanted, that they risked their lives, that their friends and siblings lost their lives for. So people like Merrick Garland and Matthew Graves and Lisa Monaco can do to this country what they're doing. So Merrick Garland, you're not the only one who thinks about your grandparents when you're watching what's happening in this country. I think of them too, Steve. You and I have actually talked about them. And I mean, I manage not to get choked up when I talk about my grandparents because I'm grown up. But my grandparents would be very offended and disgusted at what Merrick Garland's DOJ is doing to half of this country. And so shame on him for, playing, rolling out the tears and getting choked up so he can defend what he's doing, weaponizing his department, criminalizing political dissent, rounding up people to this day, more than 1,100 Americans criminally charged for doing nothing on January 6th. And I want to say, good for Victoria Spartz. I was critical of her early on because she's a big defender of Ukraine, which is fine. But she showed the most passion today, and she got right to the heart of the issue, is that her constituents are afraid. They are afraid, not a knock on the door of the FBI, a 5:30 a.m. armed raid with battering rams and SWAT vehicles, because that's what's happening under Merrick Garland's DOJ. And he can cry all he wants about his grandparents. But how many grandparents, parents, children, families is he destroying, responsible for destroying? A lot.
He's an evil, he's a small evil man. And every night before I go to bed, I thank God that I had a tiny, tiny role in making sure that he was not a lifetime appointee to the Supreme Court of the United States, because he is an evil person. And people should know, come 2025, it's going to be a different deal. We're going to get to the bottom of all of it, and we're going to hold him accountable. And we're going to see Merrick Garland perp-walked. Julie, give me your overall assessment, because today was pretty extraordinary in the House of lighting this guy up consistently. Just put it in perspective. What did we learn today, and how do we go forward and really making a case against what he's done on January 6th? And of course, part of the reason the CR is not coming forward is people are saying, hey, McCarthy promised all the J6 footage. He promised to get on top of these investigations. Nothing's happened. What do you think we learned today?
I mean, obviously, the huge dual standard of justice. I mean, Merrick Garland should be perjured simply for his statement claiming that he is instituting a fair system of justice. I mean, the idea that he is not favoring Democrats over Republicans or charging Republicans or conservatives more than Democrats is utterly laughable. I mean, we know that that simply is not the case. He should be charged with perjury. He should charge himself for perjury for that. So the dual system of justice was on full display. Personally, I wish they had not spent so much time on the David Weiss issue that's still unfolding. I would have liked to have seen Merrick Garland in the hot seat for seeking terror enhancements for nonviolent individuals in their sentencing for January 6th convictions. I would have loved for someone to ask him if he thought that Trump supporters can get a fair trial in Washington, D.C., because, of course, he's opposing every single change of venue motion. I would have liked to see more on CHSs, especially not just January 6th, but related to the Whitmer Fednapping hoax. He was an AG then, but his Department of Justice prosecuted the 4 individuals who faced federal charges. So I think overall it was good to see passion from House Republicans. It was good to see them drill down on what exactly Merrick Garland is doing. But there is a lot more to be learned. And it does seem like they are focused on getting more information, not just about the Weiss-Hunter Biden investigation, but the handling of January 6th and other politically charged investigations.
Talk to me about this report out. The question that got answered that he slipped out of, I think, on these. What's this report that's coming out that they couldn't even manage? They had so many Fed assets on J6, they couldn't even manage it. Just walk me through what the facts we know about this and why is it coming out now?
So this was based on a transcript released last night by House Judiciary, and this was the transcribed interview with Stephen D'Antuono. D'Antuono was the head of the Detroit FBI field office during the Whitmer Fednapping hoax. He was promoted in October of 2020 to take over the Washington field office. So he was the one responsible for taking all of the intelligence that the FBI was getting, disseminating it, in this case, not disseminating it, related to January 6th. So he's really the key figure in both of those issues. What he told the House Judiciary Committee over the summer is that he had no idea how many FBI informants from various field offices were on the ground or present on January 6th, and that they were getting so many questions about it that the FBI headquarters had to conduct a survey with the FBI field offices to see how many CHS's informants were involved either before or on January 6th. So he did not know. Now, I will say he probably didn't know. And I don't really condemn him for not necessarily knowing, because it's true that these field offices could have sent CHS's who they had embedded in groups like the Proud Boys, for example, or the Oath Keepers, which we know that they did. But look, more than 3 years removed, to your point, Steve, we demand those answers. The idea that the DOJ and FBI to this day, for an event that they compare to 9/11, that they compare to Pearl Harbor and the Oklahoma City bombing, they still think that they can get away without telling us, giving us some amount of data about FBI informants and undercover agents who were involved before and on January 6th.
They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it, and not going to do it until you start bringing charges against these guys. They're not going to do it. They were in back of that, and they understand it. And we should have all the information now. This shows you the weakness. And right now, Kevin McCarthy's putting up another. I just want to give a news break here. He's going to put forward, a stopgap funding. He's going to have some cuts. He's going to actually add a commission to look at the debt problem. This is a joke. And he's going to attach HR 2. These are all shiny toys. They think you're a group of morons. The answer in the CR is no. Get back to the appropriation process and let's get the massive cuts. He continues at CR now. They're going to have a commission on debt. They think you're a moron. We don't need a commission on debt. It's not that complicated. Okay, we don't need a commission. It's going to take 2 years and call some witnesses and then have a bunch of recommendations and nothing happens. That is what you pitch on Fox. Go to Fox. Go on Hannity tonight and pitch that. That's what the Fox audience, the passive Fox audience, they'll nod their head, say, "Oh, that's interesting. We'll get a commission on debt." No, it's ridiculous. Stop insulting people. Where do we go from here, Julie? What do you want to see? Because people are getting fired up now. The reason Sparks is so fired up and these people are so fired up, and Van Drew, their constituents got a bayonet to their back right now, saying, "You heard her." People are furious. The more they hear about this, the more they see people getting uptick terrorist charges for 40 years, for 40 years in prison, and nothing happens to BLM, nothing happens to the Chinese Communist Party people are here, nothing happens to the Marxists and the uniparty globalists that they're protecting in this evil dwarf, because that's who he is, evil, blubbering dwarf. Like the beginning with the tears. Oh, stop. Will you stop it? I'm getting all choked up. It's so ridiculous. Right before, because he knows you're going to get hammered with the Catholic question. If he's so concerned about religions, why did you go into Catholic churches and try to roll up the hobbits? Answer the question. And if not, they should drag him out. He's sitting there lying to your face, this little evil dwarf. Julie Kelly.
Well, I'm going to do you one worse than Merrick Garland, and that is watching his line prosecutors in action. If you think that Merrick Garland is evil, you should see what these line prosecutors are doing in the courtroom, what they're saying about defendants, what they're getting away with, for the even worse, what they're getting away with in the courtrooms of, say, Judge Tim Kelly, who we talked about. Another reason why we don't know more about the deep FBI involvement in January 6th is the cover-up by DOJ, not just people like Merrick Garland, his line prosecutors, but also judges who refuse to let jurors hear from FBI informants, who conceal documentation about the number of FBI informants in certain cases, like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. When defense wants to call some of these informants as defense witnesses, they are immediately denied by the judges. So, this is a collaborative effort. We should know a lot more, just like what we found out in Whitmer. I mean, we found out there were at least a dozen FBI informants. We found out that there were at least 3 undercover agents. We found out that there were numerous supervising agents out of multiple field offices involved in this. So why can't we find out the same in Washington? Well, because it is the same rigged system, this banana republic style climate that every January 6th defendant has to deal with. And it is a coordinated effort to cover up what the FBI and other government agencies did.
If he had true respect for the nation that reached out their arms and took in his ancestors and protected them, and then went and destroyed the industrial murder of the Jews, destroyed it, root and branch, and freed the camps. If he had true respect for that, he would not be doing what he's doing today to patriots. He's an evil, evil, evil man, and he will pay for his evilness. Okay? As sure as the turning of the earth. Julie Kelly, how do people follow you, ma'am?
Declassified with Julie Kelly is my Substack, Twitter, Julie_Kelly2, and True Social, Julie_Kelly.
Thank you, ma'am. He perjured himself today. There should be immediate charges brought. This is going to be, by the way, this is going to be a massive investigation starting on the afternoon of the 20th of January in the year of our Lord 2025. Now, for some of us, that's too far away. The House should do this immediately. And Jim Jordan, I thought Jim Jordan was extraordinarily weak today. I thought he was weak. I thought he was way too deferential. They need more attack dogs in there. You need attack dogs, because that's all they relate to. That's all they can respond to. Otherwise, they're just going to lie to you continually. Everybody's on offense.
And so we have to take issue with Steve Bannon many times, but on this, I couldn't agree more. And it's about time that somebody out there in the media who has some kind of testosterone left in their body start to speak out like a man would do and start to actually brace these people and use your rhetoric and whatever gifts you have and whatever wealth and sacred honor or whatever means you can to ultimately fight for the freedom of America. Forget about Ukraine. Ukraine is just emblematic of what is going to befall many nations in the world, I fear. So I think that we need to think about what it's going to take to shore up America, to make sure we just kind of root out all these dissipators, and ideologues and partisan destroyers that are just there to somehow turn the government of the people into their own personal empowerment instrument, right? They're just there to wield the policies to create the most destruction, to enrich their allies. And you can see that there are massive financial interests that are just set against this country. We always like to say George Soros because that's the scumbag that is kind of like the new Rothschild moron, the low-level financial idiot, the low-level billionaire that they kick out and trot out for everyone to scorn. And of course, his particular brand of psychopathy allows for him to, try to shove all of our faces in what kind of monstrous behaviors and decisions and influence and malign influence that him and his family are having in the world. So we're going to continue to speak up and continue to watch our enemies fall on the right hand, on the left, 1,000 on the right hand, 10,000 on the left. They'll all fall. We'll be standing, guys. We're going to be standing because we're the hobbits and we're built in with the resilience that they think they're going to achieve digitally or by having deep underground bunkers or space lasers or, infrared satellite blinding equipment or just whatever DARPA thinks of next, right? And whatever the advance towards military hegemony. So it just drives the technology. It just drives the new weaponry. So you can see that America is going to use these cheap little plastic digital subs to go around and do the work that submarines used to do. As everyone tries to build $1 billion submarine, we can now just put little floaters out that can do everything that a sub can do, which is, can guide missiles and can, and they're replaceable. They're cheap. That's the kind of thinking that's going to be required here. We're going to have to think on a whole new scale. The 5th generation warfare is here. So as we were reporting about the Maui fires, it looks like that 5 days after the attack on 8/8/2023 at Maui, they, of course, implemented a new secret space program, right? So we have Space Force, and there was a new echelon, a new secret Space Force program was implemented and enacted quietly in the background, and they put up some equipment, some heavy satellites into space. So I think we're now fully into Star Wars. We're fully into this era of space wars. And I think that deniers can deny it. They deny everything. They go in with their binoculars and look for UFOs. They're flat earthers, man. They're Democrats. They're Biden worshipers or whatever. You know what I'm saying? He's just kissing the baby. They're deniers. They're supporters and enablers of this new global regime, and they're stuck in the matrix, and they're in the way. And when you're in the way, it's too bad. I mean, if there's a battlefield and you run out in between the cannons and just get mowed down, it's like nobody's fault. The cannons don't stop. Everything, the weaponry and the warfare and the information war continues, even if you're just unable to grasp what's taking place. So that's why we're here. We're moving at this velocity. We're going at this high rate of speed, and we've got you up to speed. And now it's up to you to follow course, to follow suit, to pursue the leads that we're leaving you, to find out the truth for yourself. And it's not there. It's suppressed. When you go look for it, it won't be there. You'll have to do other means. You have to try other. You won't be able to find it on YouTube and Google. Try to look for answers on Rumble. Try to look for answers on BitChute. Right? You ever heard of BitChute? No, you haven't. So go check that out. Go check out Telegram. Look for the video files. Look for the things, the information that they cannot suppress. They can't control, where the media can't control your mind. Look for new information sources, find out new data, and just learn to take responsibility for what is going on in the world for yourself, and don't just expect that the guardrails that are supposed to be there for your safety are going to continue to be what you think they are. So, and all the safety guardrails lead you inexorably into your own confinement, into, over the edge, like the lemmings, into the chamber of the, where you can't, digital or otherwise, the algorithm ghetto, where you can't escape. That's where this is all about. That's why you can't be part of those who are on the great paved, massive highway to hell, right? You have to find the road to life. It's very narrow, and it's a hidden path. It's hard to find, and few find it. But that's the path you need to be on, guys. With that, we will see you next time. So now it's time for a word from our sponsor. And as you know, our sponsor is graciously helping us to keep our show going here. So it's wendyslimited.com. wendyslimited.com. So wendyslimited.com. wendyslimited.com has all the hottest new styles and couture trends and latest boutique women's apparel and shoes and heels and flats and all kinds of just wonderful stuff. You have Hives and Honey jewelry armoire, so the favorite lately. And we have, of course, Windsor crystal lamps. I have one in stock in particular that has been a favorite. So wendyslimited.com is always open to help you get everything you need. Awesome Prada purse that we saw that Wendy's Limited just put up. So we have to think who out there wants to get incredible Prada fashion couture. You know that from what I hear, they're a favorite of many, many ladies out there, many women all over the place. In fact, I think you cannot find a single family member or wife or sister or aunt or grandmother or loved one or girlfriend or what have you that does not love Prada purses. So if you want to be totally awesome, you have to eventually come to grips with wendyslimited.com. Wendy's Boutique Limited has all the hottest new styles and latest women's apparel, everything you need to be totally awesome. If you're a woman or if you have a woman who's someone that you love. And of course, we all love women because they're just so awesome. That's why wendyslimited.com is so successful. So go check out Wendy's Boutique. wendyslimited.com is the only place to go. And we have to recommend, she's been totally 100% awesome to us and generous. So we are always going to be buying our jewelry, fine jewelry, gold and silver jewelry, and all of our best boutique, couture, and designer trends. We're going to go to wendyslimited.com. So check out Wendy's Boutique Limited.